Hello. This podcast is available unedited and ad-free at patreon.com/Hamilton Morris. Each month, I release 3 to 4 new podcasts, and it was Patreon exclusive until recently. Many people contacted me and said they wanted me to figure out a way to make it freely available, and so I decided to accept sponsorship from a few of my friends. One of them is David Rentlin, the founder of a company called Lucy Nicotine. They make nicotine gum, nicotine pouches, nicotine lozenges, some of which are made with synthetic nicotine, which I think is pretty cool. Now, if you don't already use nicotine, I recommend that you don't start. It's habit forming. But if you already do use nicotine products, and especially if you smoke tobacco cigarettes, I can say that this is a cleaner product. And it's also a product that I use personally. If you go to lucy.co and use the code Hamilton, you get 20% off your purchase. Lastly, this podcast is brought to you by Top Tree Herbs, an herbal tea company founded by my friend and pharmacopoeia producer, Soren Shade. This is not a traditional sponsorship in that I'm not receiving any money from them, but Soren is actually a producer on this podcast. They grow their own Kratom domestically in Appalachia in a greenhouse, which is very beautiful, and they source leaves internationally, do third-party testing. I've been to the lab where they do the testing. They test for heavy metals and other adulterants, and it's ethically sourced in tea bag form. You can find their teas at toptreeherbs.com. So this is an interview that I have been preparing for, hoping for, waiting for no less than 14 years. Anyone who's interested in psilocybin containing mushrooms is familiar with the penis envy strain, named because it looks like a penis. The penis envy strain is, according to many spore retailers, the best-selling Psilocybin cubensis strain. It's a strain that's not only infamous for its phalloid morphology, but also for its potency. There's a sort of saying that you often encounter on mushroom forums like the Shroomery, where someone will start a thread saying, I can get B+ or Treasure Coast or Golden Teacher. Which one should I get? What's the difference between them? And this is exacerbated by spore and mushroom retailers that sometimes make non-evidence-based claims about how this or that Psilocybin cubensis strain has this or that virtue. And what the seasoned growers on these forums will always say is a cube is a cube, meaning any Psilocybin cubensis strain is more or less interchangeable with any other Psilocybin cubensis strain. But they always have one caveat that they add. A cube is a cube except for penis envy. Penis envy is so much stronger and so different from other strains of Psilocybin cubensis that it's almost treated like it's a different species entirely. And so the question emerges, where did this come from? It's not naturally occurring. I have seen Psilocybin cubensis growing all over the country, all over the world. I've never seen one that looks so much like a penis. And just to be clear, for anyone that hasn't seen one, this is a strain with a very, very thick stem and a very small cap, the diameter of which is more or less identical to that of the stem. In many instances, the cap does not open, the mushroom does not effectively sporulate, so it's clear that this mutation is one that would be maladaptive outside of human cultivation, in the same way that a French bulldog would be maladaptive outside of human breeding because they have to be born via cesarean section. The same is basically true of penis envy. They have been bred in such a way that their very reproductive mechanisms of spore dispersal are attenuated. One of the first things I did when I was a young man becoming interested in writing stories about psychedelics was try to solve this mystery. It seemed pretty straightforward. You've got a mushroom that looks like a penis. Find out who created it. It didn't occur naturally. Someone made this thing. They must be proud of what they created. Track them down, talk to them about it, find out where it came from. There's a lot of discussion on these forums about the various mushroom pioneers, people like Terence McKenna or Dennis McKenna or PF. And yet, I had difficulty finding an authoritative explanation for how exactly this strain emerged. And really, the only person who seemed to have anything close to firsthand knowledge was a mushroom fanatic named John Allen, aka MJ Shroomer, aka Mushroom John. Mushroom John is infamous in the psychedelic mushroom community. He is a graphomaniac who has posted thousands of times on virtually every mushroom forum and also maintained a personal website with thousands of photos of mushrooms that he had observed around the world. He was the unofficial archivist for the world of psilocybin-containing mushrooms, and if you asked him a question, no matter who you were, you would get a response. What I came to learn was that Mushroom John's eagerness to communicate was complicated. John Allen actually misled me intentionally, by his own admission, and at that time I was more credulous, less critical, less skeptical in general, and I wrote this sort of ridiculous article for Vice that was published in early 2009, and it gave what was ultimately a false history of the penis envy mushroom strain. In this article, I uncritically repeat a lot of the outlandish claims that Mushroom John had presented to me, as well as hearsay from various forums, and probably a fair bit of confabulation on top of that. I was trying to piece together these fragmented components of a narrative that had never been published in any kind of historical literature. Where did it come from? Pollock was maybe involved, McKenna was involved, and then there was one other person named Rich G, a pseudonym for a mysterious mycologist named Richard Gutierrez. It was clear what I had to do. I had to find Rich G, and I had to ask him personally where this mushroom came from. He was the only person that truly knew. The problem was that Rich G didn't talk to anybody. He had last been interviewed in May of 1998, now more than 23 years ago. He doesn't talk to people. He doesn't exist on the internet. He is, in the words of the only other outsider to ever interview him, a shadow. What I knew about Rich G was derived in part from the strange anecdotes I'd heard from mushroom growers and Mushroom John, but largely came from a pseudonymously authored article in a now defunct Seattle newspaper called Voltage, written by somebody named Linton Robinson under the pseudonym Rob Poole. And the story presented in this article was almost too strange to be believed. It told the story of a trained botanist and geneticist who had been shot in the head and had gained a psychic connection to mushrooms. This psychic connection allowed him to achieve feats of cultivation and genetic manipulation that otherwise would have been impossible. Now that's a story. I looked everywhere for Rich G. I called every Richard Gutierrez in Seattle. Couldn't find him. And if I did, I doubt he would have talked to me. I never stopped. Every time I encountered somebody who might know something about mushrooms, any elder in the mushroom community, I would say, "Do you know Richard Gutierrez?" And if they did, they would often say, "Sorry, he's not going to talk to you." But I didn't give up. In August of 2015, I went to Seattle to search for him. I knew that he sold mushroom grow kits at a head shop called Pipe Place in Pike Place Market, the same place where the original Starbucks is located. When I arrived at Pipe Place, I said that I was interested in the history of the penis envy strain and I wanted to speak with Richard Gutierrez. The person working at the counter gave me a knowing look, and they said they couldn't help me. I asked if I could leave a note for Richard Gutierrez. They said they couldn't stop me, and so I did. Apparently he came in moments after I'd left, but he never called me. Even his books were tremendously difficult to find. He'd authored 2 books, one in 1976 with the title How to Identify and Grow Psilocybin Mushrooms, and another in 1995 called Cubensis Aquarium Gardening. The latter publication was especially interesting to me because the cover prominently featured a photograph of a mushroom strain that could clearly be identified as the progenitor of what we now call penis envy, long before the name had ever been used publicly. But even that book was impossible to find. The only known copy was in the possession of John Allen, and he refused to show it to me. I went to John Allen's apartment to plead with him, to ask him to let me see this book. We did an interview. I tried to extract whatever information I could, and then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it on the bookshelf. The comb-bound, rarest of rare mushroom books, Cubensis Aquarium Gardening. I went over to his bookshelf, and I quickly read the book cover to cover. It said nothing about penis envy, but it was clear. That was it. The first images of penis envy published in a book by Richard Gutierrez. He was clearly the creator. In his 1976 book, he described selling an Amazon cubensis strain. This is supposedly derived from Psilocybin cubensis collected by Terence McKenna in the Amazon in his infamous trip with his brother Dennis McKenna. So let me just take a step back quickly into the history of psilocybin mushroom cultivation. We live in a very privileged time when it comes to mushrooms. It's been taken for granted my entire life that mushrooms can be cultivated at all. But when you take a step back to the 1960s, when psychedelics are first becoming culturally important commodities, it was a very different scene. Psychedelic luminaries like Timothy Leary could travel to Mexico and try mushrooms, but that was about it. Believe it or not, people didn't realize that psilocybin-containing mushrooms grew in the United States. This was something that was discovered long after Wasson's trip to Oaxaca to meet Maria Sabina. On top of that, even when people did know that they grew in the United States, that was only something that was available to a small number of people in the Pacific Northwest and maybe Texas. What about the average person? What about someone living in New York City? How could they get psilocybin-containing mushrooms? Would it be possible for somebody to cultivate them? We take this completely for granted, but it was actually Dennis McKenna who first adapted laboratory techniques for the cultivation of fungi and published a book with his brother in 1975 that detailed exactly how psilocybin-containing mushrooms could be cultivated by the amateur. And that set off a revolution. In 1976 and 1977, an enormous number of new books about mushroom cultivation were published, and the art rapidly evolved. By the time I was in high school, you could buy spores and spore syringes and grow kits on the internet. And high school students would grow mushrooms under their bed in their parents' house. This was just something you could do. If you needed help, you could find support on a variety of different mushroom forums. But it was not like that in the 1970s. I'm very interested in this early era. I'm interested in the scientific contributions, and I'm really interested in people that take complicated laboratory techniques and make them simpler and simpler. And the evolution is continuous. The Uncle Ben tech shows that you can make mushroom cultivation even easier than it was a few years ago. It keeps getting better. People keep improving it, and I love that. But I yearned to understand the origins of the penis envy, and I knew that Richard Gutierrez was the only person who could tell me where it came from. Finally, I met someone who knew him, a family member, and she offered to put me in touch. I received an email from Richard Gutierrez, and he told me that if I shared it with anyone, he would delete it and we'd never speak again. We had some exchanges, and eventually he invited me to Seattle to meet with him. I got on the plane immediately. I brought microphones and a recorder, and this is the sort of thing actually that Patreon has been wonderful for, because in the past I might have thought twice, but this made it clear I've got to do this. And he was a little bit tricky to interview. He didn't want to speak into the microphone. He wanted to speak very quietly. I was recording with 3 microphones. You'll find that the audio quality is a little bit inconsistent, so forgive me for that. But I think the story that emerges is one that is very unusual and fascinating. Many people who are scientifically oriented like myself are also atheist, agnostic, materialists who don't really have much of what could be called spirituality. I'm, of course, a great believer in the power of psychedelics, and I believe that the human mind can do extraordinary things, but I don't ever attribute them to the supernatural. I'm always amazed by scientists that don't think the way I think. Scientists that are religious, that believe in God, that believe in the supernatural. These two belief systems seem incompatible to me, but clearly that's not the case. Richard Gutierrez is a prime example. He's somebody who has all sorts of supernatural beliefs, remote viewing, telekinesis. He has psychic abilities. He claims to be able to communicate with other species. And the origin of this story is quite remarkable. As a 10-year-old, he was shot in the face accidentally by his father. He almost bled to death, partially due to racial discrimination in the 1950s. And without adequate medical care, he had a case of lactic acidosis so severe that he believes he suffered irreparable brain damage. He also believes that he died, and when he was revived, he never fully re-entered the world of the living. He remained with one foot in the world of the dead for 16 years, literally accompanied by death. Quite remarkable and unusual by my standards. During this time, he got a degree in botany and began working at an incredibly prestigious lab at the University of Washington, studying yeast replication with Leland Hartwell. And believe it or not, the research that Richard Gutierrez was doing with Hartwell truly was the basis of a Nobel Prize, because this was research that was used to uncover the mechanism of cell division. I mean, this is work so fundamental that it's almost taken for granted again. I even contacted Leland Hartwell, now 81 years old, the Nobel laureate, and he responded promptly. And he said, "Dear Hamilton, that was a long time ago. Richard worked as a student helper. He was bright, enthusiastic, and a wonderful person to have in the lab." I didn't tell Dr. Hartwell that Richard Gutierrez invented one of the most notorious strains of psilocybin-containing mushrooms, one that looks like a penis. But I would like to think that he would appreciate it on some level, knowing that his research helped inform a young man to strive to new heights of genetic manipulation. He created not just a penis mushroom, but even a mushroom with a urinary meatus. A penis envy strain with a penis hole. Astonishing. I had fantasies. I imagined Gutierrez working in the darkness for years, breeding strain after strain, burning the ones that didn't look sufficiently like a penis. But that's not exactly how it happened. The real story is remarkable in its own way. He was selecting for bluing. One of the wonderful things about psilocybin compared to something like mescaline is you can actually visually detect the alkaloid concentration in the mushroom in a way that isn't possible with many other organisms. You can't look at a peyote cactus and know how much mescaline is in it, but you can touch a mushroom, and based on the severity of the bruising, you can estimate the psilocin content. Now, I wouldn't say this is anywhere near quantitative, but apparently it doesn't need to be, because he was tremendously successful using this technique. I think it was my fascination with Gutierrez that led me to the Pollock story and so many other interesting stories in my career, and so I feel very close to him even though we've never met before. This is a strange story. I am leaving it almost uncut, pardon the pun, because I want you to have a feeling for how strange this conversation was. It is equal parts spiritual, mystical, and scientific, but behind it all are two very real discoveries: Leland Hartwell's discovery of cell division cycles and the penis envy mushroom. Both are real, and that much is certain. The rest of it, I'll leave that up to you. I'm going to pause momentarily for an ad. This podcast is also brought to you by the Apollo. The Apollo is a wearable, vibrating bracelet or anklet that appears to be able to modulate your consciousness. And when I first heard about this thing, I was very skeptical. I was at a conference and met a psychiatrist and neuroscientist named David Rabin, and he had built this prototype and let me wear it for a night. During the entire night, I felt very calm and euphoric and good. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is just placebo. But I also told him that if he ever built more of them, I'd really like to try it again. So he sent me one, and now I've used it for hundreds of hours. It's a very versatile, wearable device that they are selling for stress relief, but you can modulate the frequency of the vibrations to create either a stimulating or calming effect. You can actually sleep wearing it and it seems to help sleep, or you can change the frequency and it has a sort of stimulating effect, which I sometimes use while I'm on a long drive. I've tried a lot of these different non-pharmacological means for alteration of consciousness, like binaural beats and various types of stroboscopic visual stimulation. Usually I'm skeptical of this sort of thing, but this tactile modulation of mood actually does seem to work. The idea being that it delivers a gentle, soothing vibration that conditions your nervous system to recover and rebalance after stress. That's the idea. It's sort of like a vibrating chair or strapping a purring kitten to your leg. If you find a purring kitten calming, then I think you would also find this calming. It's a similar sort of phenomenon. If you're interested in getting one of these devices, you can go to apolloneuro.com to read more about it and use the promo code Hamilton for 10% off. Thank you, Apollo.
Well, my tendency is not to speak very loudly.
Okay, I can even turn up the... do you mind...
Well, Mushroom John has friends, but you talk to him a year later, year after that, he doesn't have friends. Because he just can't shut his mouth, for one thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're recording or not.
Yeah, I just started recording, or I'm testing this.
Well, I met Mushroom John on the streets of Seattle picking mushrooms. And we would drive around and he'd be hanging onto some corner post at an intersection. And there's really no place he wouldn't go. He'd jump your fence. Anywhere there were mushrooms, he was there. And so we found out that he was writing a book on mushrooms, and I had already started before then writing a book on mushrooms. But actually between that time that I knew him and the coming of the PEs, I didn't really see him. He was in Hawaii for a while. And I happened to talk to somebody in Hawaii, and they said, "Do you know Mushroom John?" And I said, "Yeah." Well, they put him on the phone. And I couldn't get rid of that guy. I went to a fair with my girlfriend, and he wanted to know where we were, and he won't shut up. And so, like, I went to there and I told him I was there, and we left to go somewhere else because we didn't want him. We were wanting to be together. So anyway, he has this. He says he's got this problem, medical problem, where he has to talk and talk about everything all the time. And so, I was on a minibus in Thailand going to Cambodia, 16-hour trip. He never stopped talking to the girl next to him. She was done with him in 10 minutes, but he never stopped for 16 hours talking to her. And her boyfriend said, "Does this train ever stop?" Because it doesn't. So you can only tolerate so much of that. And he'll ask you a question, and he'll interrupt you and give you your own answer. He's not into sharing anything. It's got to be his limelight. He's a lot like Trump. It's got to be Trump. It's got to be Mushroom John. I went with him to Cambodia, Thailand, and every time I lifted my camera, he stuck his face in front of it.
Yeah, I believe it. He's a character.
Yes.
He's a character, but in Mushroom John's defense, as nutty as he is a font of knowledge for a lot of people, especially young people on the shroomery, things like that. Of course, he got into horrible trouble and was banned and
really? I didn't know that.
Excommunicated and
from the shroomery.
Yeah, and then he tried to call the FBI on them, and it didn't. Even the entire forum ended up in a argument with him.
Well, funny thing, that's kind of what happened to me. He threatened me by saying that he talked his son and daughter into calling the FBI, making up stories about wholesale drugs that are hanging all over my house, so I could get arrested and go to jail forever.
Oh. That's no good.
So he's not allowed anywhere near me.
That's terrible. He's a. I don't know what's wrong with him.
It has to be about himself. When it isn't, you see a different side of him.
Right.
And I went to Thailand with him, and I have a certain tolerance level. And I went to Cambodia with him, and but it was two trips: Thailand, Cambodia, and then I went to Amsterdam with him. And when he's around people that he admires, he'll shut up. And he'll listen. And that's the thing about like this book, Gartz would listen to him. And a lot of what Mushroom John knows is other people's stuff that's been done by other people, but he knows, he's read it, and so he can regurgitate it. But so he does have a lot of information to share. But as a scientist, he's not much of a scientist. He doesn't know much about science. He doesn't understand what he's seeing a lot of times. But he has been hanging around a lot of nice guys, people who know what they're talking about. So he's got a lot of good information. But my feeling is that Mushroom John started this whole problem with the PEs. What people don't realize is when Terrence was in the Amazon, he didn't bring back a PE. He brought an Amazon strain back. That's all he did. He brought Amazon strains of mushrooms. I don't think I have ever met Terrence McKenna personally. I think I would remember it. And so between me and Terrence McKenna, there's no connection at all.
But in your early books, you were selling an Amazonian strain. Do you know what the origin of that?
Correct.
Yeah, so what was the origin of that?
Okay, so some things that I'm going to say to you, you probably don't want to regurgitate the same way. You might want to soften them up a bit. Okay, so when you go to a bar, you might ask, like, where can I get some pot? Bartender usually knows. They're known for that. I have a friend who was a hairstylist. Same idea. You want a haircut? You want some pot? Same deal. Well, he knew a lot of people because of that. One day he knocks on my house because my neighbor knew I was going to be writing a book. And he knew somebody who had written the marijuana books. The first one's about growing marijuana under lights. Mm-hmm. And so while we were writing the book, we ended up getting a hold of some cubensis Earl from Florida. And so we started selling the spores of those mushrooms. Now, one day he shows up and he's picked up another mushroom, and that was the Amazon strain. And so what happened was...
This is your bartender friend?
No.
Hairstylist
friend?
Yeah.
But I'm using that as a reference. You see on TV, You go to the bartender if you want some drugs. Well, this hairstylists were in the same position back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And so anyway, he knew a lot of people, and he knew a lot of places, people in high places and low places. And so anyway, one day he shows up with this dry mushroom, and it's an Amazon, and he said that it came from a pound of mushrooms that had been bought by a friend of his. And that friend of his had got them in California.
Mm-hmm.
And he was told that they were direct descendants of mushrooms from Terence McKenna.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they were off his prints or somebody else's prints from his.
And this was 1975, something like that? Your book came out in 76, the first edition.
No, it wasn't then. Well, the naming of the Amazons happened about 87, 88. That's when they became PEs, 87 or 88. And that was because I named them that. But we did sell prints of an Amazon mushroom. Like I said, supposedly they came from some of Terence McKenna's prints. We didn't get a print. We got a little dry mushroom.
Right.
Okay. So everybody talks about Terence McKenna finding the PE. Well, they didn't exist to be found.
Of course, yeah.
And so by the time I met Mushroom John, I already had 10 years of lab work under my belt. From the University of Washington, I worked in genetics, I worked in a hospital. I did lab work in my sleep. And so I can grow anything. I can go to the store and get any mushroom off the shelf, and I can pretty much grow it. I don't need to know anything. I've got so much science behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where John and I differ a lot is, I've got the training, and he's kind of just picked it up from other people. To sell spore prints of those spores, we had to get some generated. And so Jules Stevens, the other person in the book, he picked up a octagonal fish tank made out of plexiglass. And I actually ran across that picture before I talked to you, and then I lost it again. It's somewhere in my photos. It's a picture of that tank with the 3 strains of mushrooms in it. And so when the spores were taken, they were plated out. They were grown in rye berries and then planted in this aquarium. And the 2 strains, 1 and 2, were normal looking, little mushrooms as big as your fingers. But strain number 3, there were a couple of really funky mushrooms with their heads bent over and a whole bunch of little aborts. And I looked at the aborts and I said, wow, that's a strong mushroom. Because the aborts were like blue-black. And so...
Let's just wait for this to...
Sightseers. Now, most of my science has been under a microscope. One of my jobs was to take a pipette, where you pick up water with, and stretch the end to infinity, and put it in this gadget. And then I had to look through the microscope, find the end of that pipette in the microscope, lowered it onto the auger where there were yeast cells. And they had just made it so there were 4 basically miniature yeasts inside each one. So I'd have to crack the wrapper and take those 4 yeast individuals and line them in a line. I could do that with my eyes closed. And this was
using the tip of the pipette to manipulate the individual cells.
It's called micro manipulation.
Uh-huh.
And so this was a 3-year project, and I got it done in 6 months because I know my science. And so when I looked at those aborts, usually when people take something like that, they want it to be strong, so they can take a little bit, or they can take a lot because it's strong. And knowing my friends, I knew what they were looking for, so why fool around with the ordinary ones that everybody has? And so here's these funky ones. And the reason their necks are bent over is because they have bad genetics. And the reason there's so many aborts is because it's got bad genetics. The PE mushroom is born of bad genetics. Now, we did grow the other strains, and those got sold as Amazons because it took a while to get the genetics to work on that one. So the next level after that, one of the little stick mushrooms was plated out, and the mycelium was really bluing. And so that was growing out and had the same problem. There was a few little mushrooms and a lot of aborts. So after about the 5th time of doing that, the mushroom started getting to be normal. But because of the bad genetics, they don't tend to make a lot of spores. And if they do, the spores don't tend to come off the caps. They tend to stick to the caps, and it's hard to get a good print. And if you do get a good print, a lot of the spores aren't viable. And so to keep that mushroom going, every 2 or 3 or 4 months, you'd have to go back to spores, bring it back from the dead, and start a new strain. Mm-hmm. And that happened over 20 years regularly. And so the deal with them is the genetic defect makes them stronger, but they're physically weaker. And that's why a lot of times they're really flippy-floppy. But knowing science, you can take bad genetics and you can correct them a little bit. And so we intuitively knew which mushrooms to clone to keep the same thing going. And there ended up being a stocky one that was straight, always straight, with a fairly big head that didn't open. And then there was another one that kind of was a floppy stem, long stem, but it had like a sleeping cap from the 80s. It was like the pioneers used to wear those crossing the country in their wagons, these floppy little hats on their heads. The women did. And so those are the strains that we kept going. And so the tall, straight one would generate both strains, and the one that floppy-headed one would generate both strains. So we just keep switching back and forth to keep it alive. And the babies of those strains, to my knowledge, ended about 2 years ago. There's no more of those. The original strain from the very first one in the fish tank to now, consecutively, had been grown in Seattle until about 2 years ago.
What happened 2 years ago?
A friend of mine left town because he got himself in a little bit of trouble, and he left some prints with a roommate of his who knows nothing about science. And they were already old, and any caps older than like 6 months to a year were hard to get anything to grow out of. And so these were already 2 years old. And I know because the last time I pulled them back from the brink was on those prints, and it took a lot of work to get them back. And so to my knowledge, that line has ended and it's not available anymore.
It's tragic.
I know where there's some prints, but the prints are so old that it would take a lot of science to bring them back.
You should try.
Well, I just happen to be in a situation where my girlfriend knows all about my past, and she's okay with it, but she's on a different path. Mm. And so basically, the other thing is I used to have a farm, so people would throw stuff out in the backyard all the time. I don't have that option. And one of the reasons that the PEs got to be what they are was actually the food we fed them. You can feed them just about anything, but if you feed them the right food, they'll get 10, 12, 18 inches tall.
And what was that other than rye berries?
No, the actual growing medium wasn't rye berries.
Oh, what was it?
Compost.
Oh, wow.
Washed common or compost. And I actually built some composters that would compost the manure in 7 to 10 days instead of the 3 or 4 months. Oh. And that's the stuff, you put it on your garden, it would be gone by springtime because it was like sugar to the plants. They just ate it up. Mm-hmm. Remember I told you about my hairstyling friend?
Yeah.
You know everybody. Well, this guy bumped into a Hells Angel guy. And this Hells Angels guy, he used to work for the city. And going back to the chips. And his job was to go down the power lines and chip all the trees under them because they don't want them in the power lines. Mm-hmm. And so he would take the wood chips home. And so back in the old days, they would throw everything in the garbage, including green stuff. And so it got so expensive that they started chipping everything and throwing it back under their bushes here in the Arboretum. Mm-hmm. And so there were hundreds of pounds of cyanescence in this Arboretum every year. This Hells Angels guy, he called my friend, Jules Stevens, and he wanted to know what these mushrooms were in his backyard. Well, Jules Stevens went over there, and he and his friend picked 75 pounds of them. We can go back over this. And then I went to take pictures of them, and I helped them pick 100 or 95 pounds. And after that, they picked like another 75 pounds, and he just picked, Phil Stevens quit going over there. He got tired of picking them for him. And there were hundreds of pounds of these in his backyard. You couldn't put your feet anywhere. You'd step on them. You kneel down to try to take a picture. Luckily, he had a couple of cement pads laying around.
Wow.
Now, this is how it used to be in here. And so that's why everybody comes to the Arboretum to pick mushrooms, but now there aren't any.
Those are amazing photos.
Well, these were taken, I don't know, and here's some Veil cistus. This wasn't from here. I was growing them in a box. And this is what I learned to grow first, cyanescence.
Wow. So you said you were throwing away a lot of your photos or something? Why would you do that?
Well, I'm kind of a perfectionist, but I'm also hyperactive.
Mm-hmm.
And so usually I'm doing 2 or 3 things at once. So when I'm taking photos, people are talking behind my ears, they're getting in my way, they're getting in the light. And so I take a lot of photos from different angles to make sure that I get some good photos.
Yeah.
Because it's not unusual for me to get 1,000 bad photos, but the next time get 1,000 perfectly clear photos that nothing wrong with them. Mm-hmm. And that has to do a little bit with the brain problem I have. I was in an accident when I was 10 years old, and my body died, so my brain died. And so there are some things that my brain can't wrap itself around that my eyes see, and vice versa. And so when I take a photo, I don't really see what I'm taking a picture of. My eyes see, but my brain doesn't see. So until I print them and take them outside and look at them in the sun, I don't really know what pictures I've taken.
I'm not sure I understand.
If you look at that tree, mm-hmm. You'll see a tree, right?
Yeah.
I can look at that tree and take a picture of it. And my eyes see the tree, but my brain doesn't see the tree.
You see.
I see it right now, but it's not always the case. It's
Do you know what part of your brain was hit by the bullet?
I got shot in the jaw, actually.
Oh, it was in the jaw.
It was heading toward my spinal cord.
Yeah.
But and actually they cut me here to dig it out, but it's still in there. No, what the deal was I had lost most of my blood at the accident, and then we have to drive it to town, which took half an hour while I was bleeding. And then they had just cleaned the hospital, and I got it all dirty with my blood. So they put me in a room in the back, and they never came back. And so when they did come back, I was dead already. So anyway, if you've ever been in sports, like I was, when you run like a sprint, you hardly breathe and you just go full gallop. Well, when you run too fast and too much, you get a lot of lactic acid buildup in your muscles, mm-hmm. because it went into anaerobic oxidation. And so you can tell that your muscles haven't been getting enough oxygen. Well, when I woke up, I had so much lactic acid that it felt like somebody lit me on fire. And so my brain, it's like my eyelashes hurt, my teeth hurt, my bones hurt, because I'm just saturated with lactic acid. Mm-hmm. And so, essentially, my brain never came back. And so, it makes me sound sad right now. I'm not really sad. It's actually a form of anger.
Could you tell me about what happened?
Well, yeah, but this particular thing, it was an accident, hunting accident.
Oh.
There's all these newfangled guns out there. You can shoot 20 bullets with one click. Back in the old days, it wasn't like that. It was more like pioneer days. And so ammunition wasn't reliable. Guns weren't reliable. They didn't have they didn't make them with the instruments they do today. And so it would be possible that you put a bullet in the gun and shoot and nothing happens. So now you got a live bullet in the chamber. And you can't just leave it, so you got to, but back then it was bolt action. It wasn't even the pumps. And so anyway, you have to open the chamber to let the bullet out. And so what happens is the pin has already hit the back of the cartridge. It just, nothing happened. You open the breech, and one of three things will happen. The bullet will pop out along with the cartridge. It'll blow up in your face, or it'll shoot out the end. So my older brother and my uncle were playing with the rifle, trying to decide what to do with it. And they opened the breech, and I just happened to be in a line of sight.
Oh no.
And so it came out the front. But that's not what makes me angry. Is people think that I'm sad when I sound like this. I'm not sad.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes me angry is that the nurse was more, well, I grew up in a very racist town. And so the nurse was mad at me for getting blood all over the floor. And so that caused my death. And so when I walked in, I said to myself, wow, I made it. I'm alive.
And what town was this?
Eastern Washington. I mean, you go to the south, it's not any different. When I was at the hospital, I walked in on my own power. But when they shut the door in the back, I knew I was going to die. I've always known things like that. And I did die. But I wasn't afraid of dying, and that didn't matter to me. So really reason I'm here is my willpower. Something unusual happens to my body where it just slows down to almost nothing. So like my wife used to poke me all the time, say, breathe, or like, wake up, are you alive? Because my body can slow down so low that you won't see me breathing or anything. But I'm fully aware. So anyway, in this little town, if they ran over you, it's no big deal. Just like you're like an animal. Just like in the South. It's not a big deal if they run you over. You're not them.
And what year was that?
1959. You don't have that kind of pain after an accident unless something really bad happens. So when you watch a movie and the good guy gets shot 3 times and 5 minutes later he's got his gun back on, he's shooting and marching forward, that doesn't happen. You get hit by anything hard enough, you're not getting up. It hurts too much. It takes a lot of will. But anyway, we've always known we're Hispanic, so we're part Spain. We come from the border areas of Mexico and the U.S., so we're Indian because there's Indians on both sides. And well, we thought that our grandmother was German. And my uncle said that we might have a little French in us. 6 years ago, find out that we're actually Apache. And so my grandmother is full-blooded Apache. And we think that my father is full-blooded Kickapoo. And so what really happened is, late in the 1870s, I forget when in the 1870s, President Grant signed an execution order for the Apaches to exterminate them. And so the Apaches were already hanging out near the missions, and most of them have been given Mexican names. And so they became Mexicans so they wouldn't be killed. And then, so we always thought we were Mexicans. So later on, my grandfather comes along, and Zapata is going down the border killing Europeans because they're in a fight with Mexico. And so Zapata is going down the border killing Europeans. And so my grandfather is supposedly German and had to become a Mexican to avoid being killed by Zapata, who is he's a great Mexican hero, soldier. And so that's why we never knew what we were until recently. And then we've done some genetic stuff, and it shows on there, the Indians in there. Plus, in the middle of all this, my sister posted a picture of Facebook of our grandmother. And this Apache guy sends a link back and says, that's my aunt. And so he's the head of the Eastern Apache tribe. Not tribe, Brashe clan. We're not part of the Apache tribe. So the only interesting thing about that whole thing is when I was growing up is there's something in Spanish, whatever, history where you can give somebody the evil eye, especially little kids. You stare at them and they get the evil eye and they get colicky and they get sick. And so you hire somebody or have somebody come and we can remove the evil eye. Usually they rub an egg all over you and do incantations, and if it works, then you're okay. So my grandmother used to do that stuff, which doesn't sound very Christian because we're actually Christians. And so my grandfather supposedly could see the future a bit. And for me, I'm part of some of that too, but you know, there's a movie called The Princess Bride where the prince is poisoned, so he's gonna die. So they take him to this sorcerer to heal him, and the guy doesn't want to do it. And finally he admits, well, he's only 99% dead. We might be able to bring him back. And so that's kind of where I ended up. It's like, I was like 99% dead. But when I came back, it was like my foot got stuck in the door. And so I was neither totally alive nor totally dead for 16 years. Now that's not an easy concept to comprehend, but when I was 6 to 10 years old, we lived in a house and it happened to have a ghost, and it happened to be in our bedroom. And so, I don't know, for about 6 years, I go to bed and that ghost pokes me all night long.
What sort of a ghost?
Well, from what I can think of is it was a man, and he had done something really bad, really horribly bad, and they killed him.
What do you think he had done?
Well, whatever it was really bad. And so anyway, he was taking out his frustrations on anybody who went in that house. And after we moved out, a 16-year-old girl hung herself in the basement where the ghost was.
Oh, wow. This is in Washington?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other side of the mountains.
Yeah.
And so, since I've always been attuned to that, when I died because of the accident, it was like the door was open. I can be over there or over here. And so in the daytime I'd be here, and the nighttime I'd be dead. And so every night I would leave my body and go to the other side. Remember I mentioned astral projection, out of body stuff. But there was a period of time when all my family was afraid of me, and the relatives of my family, because nobody can explain to you the place where I was. And so when I was attending the university, I went to a psychologist and I told him about it. He said, make another appointment, talk about it. Obviously something's happening. Well, I realized he didn't know anything. So I'm walking down the street, walk by his bookstore, and there's a book, Teachings of Don Juan, Yaqui Way of Knowledge. And I picked it up, read it, and I said, oh, this is more like what I'm doing. But it was all about sorcery. And so I learned to do some of the sorcery. It wasn't that hard. And then one day I'm walking down the street again and looked in that same bookstore, and there's another book, Journeys Out of the Body. This is by a banker back east. And I read that book and I said, oh, this is more like what I'm doing, which is out-of-body stuff. And so the story only gets crazier, but the reason I know where I was is because every house I've lived in, there's been ghosts or a ghost. And they generally leave me alone, but they don't leave my roommates alone. So anyway, they basically poke me all the time. They're always coming to see what's going on. So this went on for 16 years. And then at the end of 16 years, it quit. And the reason it quit is because I became alive enough that they realized I was alive, the ghosts. So the reason they're bugging me is because they see me over there and they don't know what I'm doing there, because I don't look dead, but I don't look alive either. And so what would happen is I'd be walking down the street at night, like going home from school, and I'd look to my right and death would be walking with me. Now death, people think, well, when you die, that's death. If I shoot you, that's death. If you're dead, that's a form of death. But they don't understand the Grim Reaper thing. And so...
And when you say death, do you mean the Grim Reaper?
Well, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Like I was talking about the Princess Bride, about the guy only being 99% dead. That's kind of where I was. There's a lot of different levels of dying. Some people, you shoot them and they die automatically, and some guys you shoot them full of holes and they still won't die. But anyway, I knew where I was because death would talk to me all the time. Now, if you read the teachings of Don Juan, he talks about death as an advisor. Death would walk with me, and we'd talk about living and dying. And in 1967 was the last time I saw death, and he came by and we talked for a bit. And actually, we didn't talk; we just walked for a bit. And he looks at me and he says, "I'm not here for you." And that's the last time I saw death. Now,
what did death look like?
Imagine I put you over here, you're all in black. So you have a form, right? You're three-dimensional. Now imagine your three-dimensional form is totally painted black, so it's nothing but black. You still have three-dimensional form. Okay, so he was like you and me, but he looked like he was wearing a cape, like in Robin Hood, where they throw that cape at the friar priest, have those capes with a hat. He looked like he was kind of wearing one of those, kind of like in the cartoons, in the movies. And but the blackness was an absence. It wasn't three-dimensional fullness. It was three-dimensional absence. It was nothingness. It was just a big void of nothing. But when he looked at you, you could tell he was looking at you. And when he spoke, you could hear him. So I don't understand why people die and just go away. I don't know why the Green Reaper comes and takes some people, but obviously he does. But for me, he just gave me information. And so when I ate that first mushroom, it kind of made the connection between the dying part and the living part more real. It's like I've never been comfortable anywhere on earth. I've been a lot of places, but I know I don't belong here. And it's probably because once you've gone over here, it's like Google, it's tagged you, it knows where you are all the time. It's got its eye on you. But until death looks at you, you're just another clown over here doing your thing. But this is like, it's kind of like you're okay until the lion sees you. And once he sees you, now you're in trouble. Because you're going to look at him and he's going to look back. Now you got to deal with him. That's kind of how death is. It doesn't go away.
So 16 years after being shot in the head, you had a continuous relationship with death, and then after 16 years you tried a psilocybin containing mushroom, and that was what broke this spell?
No, I ate some mushrooms before that.
Oh, okay. So what happened at 16 years that made you more alive?
Actually, if you look at Journeys Out of the Body, it's talking about this banker who goes out there, And he encounters this one zone where there's critters or stuff that kind of attach to you or bite you and stuff, which I've never seen. And then you can explore anywhere you want. A good example is the most recent, probably already 30 years ago, but recent for me. See, I've been here a long time, and I have regressed all the way to the time where this planet was a rocky planet. There wasn't nothing here, but I was here, and so are you guys. Everybody's here. But anyway, I discovered through traveling in the outer body more about what's happening, in that I've always been really curious. I've never really stayed home. I'm always running around. I'm insatiably curious. And so anyway, when I first started, I would just pop out of my body enough to see the other side. And what's the other side? It looks just like this. It's just that you're in a different space than the other side, like in a different dimension.
Mm-hmm.
So if my body were to go over by that tree, you wouldn't know it was there. You couldn't see it, but it could see you. And that would be the same thing as your spirit, if that's what you want to call it. If you believe in God and heaven and all that, that's what would go to heaven, that spirit. But so anyway, I did this experiment with this friend of mine. We got in bed. We look at each other. Then we both popped out of our bodies. So here we are lying in bed, and here we are out of the bed. So me popped out, says, "Oh, look, we're in bed." She says, "Yeah." And I popped back in, and the me in bed says, "Look, we're over there." So the me in bed is seeing us over there on the other side, and the me over on the other side seeing me on this side. You're fully aware of your body.
So you're doubled.
You have two of me now.
Yeah.
Somebody walking into the room would only see the two in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
But once you learn how to do it, you can see any other person that's near you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like, if you're not used to squirrels and chipmunks, you don't know there's one looking at you off the branch. But once you do, then you know how to find them.
Right.
And that. And so one of the things I used to do is travel all over the universe. At first, I'd pop out here in Seattle, and one time I came through this roof, and this guy was having a party, and he's got a beer in his hand, and he looks up and says, "Oh, you're out flying again." And we had chatted for a bit, and then I left. So I could communicate with some people. But I did another test one time where I had a roommate. She wanted to know more about it. So we got in bed. I had her put her hand on my thigh. And I said, okay, I was going to take her out of her body because she wanted to know what that was about. And I said, if anything happens that you want it to stop, you squeeze my thigh and it'll stop. And so I started going out of my body. Now there's two different ways to leave, and one is the casual way, where you just kind of get up and walk away. And then there's the other way where you kind of shoot up like a rocket. Mm-hmm. And here's this rocket going into space, and you're right there on the cone. And so I did that, and then I thought, wait a minute, what if I take her with me? And so I don't know if you know a lot of astrology or those kind of things.
I don't.
Witchcraft, Well, in a lot of the mystical stuff, they talk about your solar plexus right here in your belly. Mm-hmm. And it's the center of everything. Well, yeah, it is in a sense. And they always show it like a sun shining. Mm-hmm. Well, when I was flying up into space and I thought, what if I take her with me? These octopus arms came out of my belly. And they went out like a net, and then went down and grabbed the couch, they grabbed the bed, they grabbed the floor, they grabbed everything. And then just pulled me back like an octopus would. And I hit the bed, and it was a water bed. Well, it wasn't a water bed, it was her bed. So anyway, I hit the bed, and the bed went, it was shaking like that. And I opened my eyes and I said, do you feel anything? She said, uh-huh. And I said, what did it feel like? Well, it felt like I had my finger in the light socket, but it didn't hurt. So the reason she felt that is because to do some of this thing, you have to have a higher energy level. And when there's high energy difference between you and whatever you're standing with, the energy sparks across like lightning. It's kind of, not really, but similarly. So anyway, after all these years, I've realized how to see the other side better. And
But at the 16-year change, when you became more alive, was it from these out-of-body experiences that you were having, or what was it that you?
I was having the out-of-body experiences without drugs, and I can have a out-of-body experience just drinking beer. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be anything else. But the thing about the mushrooms is, it's all about awareness. And so you can't be aware of this until you have a certain knowledge over here. You have to learn the basics. And then you get over here and you get enough knowledge and you say, oh, now I know what this is. And so there's levels of awareness. And so the astral body is the first level of awareness. And you can run around in the physical universe and see anything you want. But there's still more. So once you get past the physical body, now again, these are levels of awareness. So it's the out-of-body stuff, it's not a physical body. It's actually a level of awareness, but you can only see it as a body because of our way of thinking about things. Mm-hmm. So anyway, one day my astral was coming back, and I could tell that something was chasing it. And I heard it running, and I saw it jump out of the wall toward me, and I caught it in midair and tossed it back out. And you would say, how can I do this? And so he looked around, and he jumped back in, and I grabbed him again, and I tossed him out again. And I looked at him, it looked like he was saying, like, this is it. And so I let him come back in. And
this is you, the astral projecting version of yourself?
I was keeping the astral version of myself out.
Yeah.
And so anyway, over the next couple of days, I thought, well, if he was coming back, who tossed him out? Because the astral has a higher energy level than the physical. Mm-hmm. And so one day I pop out of my astral, and right next to me is what I call the energy body. So if you take a light bulb and you turn it on, you'll see the little filament flickering in there.
Yeah.
That's what you look like. There's a big glow of white around you, and you look like a little filament in there. I call that the energy body. And so that's what tossed the astral out. So I ran around on that for a while. And then one day I came back and was doing it again, and I popped out. So there's me, the astral, the energy body, and this other thing over here. And they all recognize me, and I recognize them. But again, these are all levels of awareness. So the unusual thing is, once you reach that level of awareness, you can combine all three of them into one awareness. And I call that the center of being, where everything you are, everything you will be, everything you can be is all in one spot. Mm-hmm. So when you crunch those bodies into one spot, it makes this one spot. And the interesting thing there is, if you have a right-handed glove, you take it off and put it on your left hand, it won't work. The thumb's wrong.
Right.
But if you turn it inside out, it'll fit.
Right.
Well, at that point, you can do something similar psychically. And life is that way. At that point, you can start looking this way, where death is. And by the time death told me he wasn't coming for me, I had already reached that point. That's the only thing that changes. I reached this point where I could go into death like this way instead of that way. So the whole thing is really basically just like the universe. There's the Big Bang, which really isn't a Big Bang, it's just another bang. So the Big Bang happens and it spreads out, goes around, comes back in the bottom and goes back in and gets reprocessed. Basically the same thing with your life. So as far as the mushrooms are concerned, with having a science background, I have my own doubts about things that are happening. So the mushrooms helped me to get past some of those doubts and actually explore differently so that I could convince myself that what was happening was actually happening. Because obviously anybody listening to what I've just said, it's pretty unbelievable stuff.
Right.
But for me, it's never been important that anybody know what I do or what I've learned or anything. It's my thing.
Right.
Aside from all the crazy stuff, I have a science degree from the university. I worked in genetics for 2.5 years.
Yeah, I think that's important to recognize. You have a serious background in all of this. It's rare that someone is in touch with both sides.
Yeah, and actually, the person I worked with ended up winning the Nobel Prize in medicine.
Who's that?
Hartwell. He was a geneticist. Then he took over the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he won it. But the work that I did from it started out that process. They were learning about how the cell functions, single cell. And the interesting part is that they were using yeast, and some of them would become kind of oblong or get little tails on them because they had a genetic defect. And so the professor worked with these yeast because they produced a hormone that caused those changes. And by using those hormones that caused those changes, they were able to figure out how the internal workings of the cell work, because they had an abnormal thing to compare against the normal. And so when I first saw the 3 strains of Amazon, my brain was already set on abnormal things, working with that. And so I saw those aborts, and I said, wow, that's the interesting thing, not this nice looking one over here, but this one's the one that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's where that got started.
This is a photo you took?
Yeah, these are photos of mine.
You're an amazing photographer. These are really beautiful.
I can do some really bad photography too. So this is the mushroom strain Earl that we used to sell. It's Jules Stevens and I used to sell spores through this company, Mycotech. And you'll see that way back here. Guess what that is?
Oh wow, looks like a penis envy.
Right, but the penis envy were being sold long before they were called penis envy. And here you'll see that there's a Amazon kit.
Mm-hmm.
So the penis envy has been around a lot longer than people realize.
Well, that's what I wanted to know. I mean, there has been so much speculation, and it's become very confused. I've probably contributed to the confusion. I wanted to learn.
I tend to blame it on Mushroom John.
Okay. Well, he did contribute, that's for sure.
Well, it's that Trump thing. It's got to be about him.
Yeah.
If he's near anything about mushrooms, he's got to say something. And the interesting part is I've known him since about 1975. And I used to give him mushroom kits like that so he could grow mushrooms to sell prints.
Right.
And guess what one of them was? PEs. And he's heard the PE story more than once from me, because everybody knew the PD story back then, because it's a funny story. And so what he said, I don't know why he said it, because he knew it wasn't true, because he already knew the story. So anyway, I would give him kits like this. All you do is throw them on the shelf, and more than 50% would fail, and only he could make them fail. It's like I started giving him double because they wouldn't work for him, because they didn't like him, I guess. I don't know, but they worked for everybody else. And so this is the kit that Homestead was selling all those years that they made all their money on.
Yeah.
And so...
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
See, in the old days, there wasn't... See, I intuitively just pick stuff up. And so you need a humid environment, you need warm. I happen to have aquarium fish. Why not aquarium mushrooms? And so in the old days, there would be fish in the back of the aquarium and mushrooms in the front. As a joke. But
you would do that?
Yeah. There's a fish tank heater there. And so I cut a plexi panel crossways, so it's 2 triangles. And the back triangle has the heater and the fish, and the front triangle has the mushrooms.
What kind of fish would you put in it?
It doesn't matter. It was just a joke anyway. You don't need the fish. So eventually I just quit that and just put a gallon jug in and the heater in the gallon jug. So now you got a microenvironment, cheap, get it anywhere.
This is, again, I know I keep saying it, but this is just an exquisite photo. And
yeah, I think my photos are just kind of blah, blah, blah. I've got a few good ones. And so, see, there's the panel. I used to sell the panel and the lid.
I see.
Just because, and a lot of this stuff is just Goodwill industry stuff. Oops.
And so this is, what, 1994, 1993, something like that? Or your book came out in 1995. Cubensis Aquarium Gardening.
76. I mean, this was I would say about let's see.
The comb-bound one.
Yeah, well, I was living with my wife when I did this because there were huge plants sitting above them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was like 78. I think these were from about 78 because I was still married.
78, okay, wow. So this is not so long after the publication of your first book.
Correct, and we didn't make a big deal of them. And the real big deal came one day in about 1987. Jules Stevens was a womanizer, and he liked dating young women, and he was dating this exotic dancer or stripper, take your pick. I say exotic dancer to make it nicer. And I happened to go to a friend's house, and I picked up a Ziploc bag full of PEs, and I was going to take home and take pictures of them, and not unlike these. And so I went downtown where Jules Stevens lived, and I went in, and his girlfriend was there, but he wasn't. He was somewhere downtown, and there were probably 6-7 strippers there. And I'm carrying this bag, and my friend says, or his girlfriend says, "What do you got in the bag?" I said, "Nothing." And then one other girl says, "What do you got in the bag?" I said, "You don't want to know." And a bunch of them said, "Yeah, we want to know." And so I had the mushrooms in a gallon bag. I put my hand in there, pulled the gallon bag up, and showed it to them. And I said, "Anyone got penis envy?" And they all said in unison, "Oh, they look like donkey dogs." That's when the penis envy started. That's when we started calling them penis envy and all the kids after 1987. But they'd been around since 78 or so.
Wow. And these were local Seattle strippers who...
Yeah.
Do you happen to know what strip club it was?
No. I wasn't into that.
Yeah.
No, I basically grew up Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been a Catholic since I was 20. But, I always grew up in a time when you do the right thing and treat people right and all that. So I tried to be that way. But, the whole PE thing was big among my friends. They loved them. In fact, they recommended people not eat them because they weren't, people were used to the Earl, which was pretty mild.
Mm-hmm.
And here we go with a big kabang. And so one friend in particular, he had a lot of biker friends. They'd go out in the woods and eat them, and sometimes they'd come back and say, "Oh, you shouldn't have given me those, they're too strong." And so anyway, it was just a big deal among us. And until those strippers said donkey dongs, that's what stirred us to start calling them PEs. We knew it'd go, we thought it was a big joke, which it was.
I think it's a very historically important story, so if we could just go through it once.
You want the name of all the strippers?
I mean, I am curious. Do you know?
No. I said I wasn't interested.
Yeah.
They tried to push one on me, but I wasn't interested.
Yeah. Okay, so let me get the trajectory of all of this. So it starts out with a hairdresser friend.
Right. Okay. Hairdresser friend gets the spores. I played them out for him. We plant them in his hexagon aquarium. 3 strains come up. And like I said, one of the strains was the heads wouldn't stay up. There was a lot of aborts. And remember I was talking about working with yeast that was abnormal. I'm so used to thinking that when I saw the aborts, I said, well, I'm not going to learn anything from the normal ones. I'm going to learn something from the abnormal ones. Knowing that I would have to clone a fairly decent one to get anything to come out, I took one of the ones that looked kind of normal but had a bent head. And that was kind of like this shape. And so that happened over 3 or 4 or 5 generations until finally a normal looking one came up. Again, with a lot of aborts. So we cloned that normal one. And there were always only like 3 or 4 mushrooms and they got big. Now, Terence McKenna talks about finding big Amazon mushrooms. I've seen some good sized mushrooms out in the woods, but never like these. The reason these are huge is because of the food we were feeding them. On the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th generation, finally a decent looking one came up, probably as big as my finger. And we cloned that one. And then we took the biggest and the blue after that. Since the beginning ones, all of them were blue because of the abort thing. But then the blue abort started going away. But the mushrooms, if you cut them, would immediately blue, solid blue. And so we just keep cloning the biggest one. And then we found out that we couldn't do that because the genetics was so bad. But luckily, we had taken some spore prints and we had saved some dry caps. And so we brought them back from the dry caps. And so probably once every 6 months, we'd have to bring them back from those dry caps. Not the same ones. We would always save some dry caps. And so they were always sold, the prints were always sold as Amazons until 1977, 78 when we gave them a name. And if it hadn't been for those strippers, it probably would just be Amazon still.
And of course, you're aware of the reputation that penis envy has. It's considered the strongest strain. You often encounter people on forums like the Shroomery saying, people will compare different strains and they'll say a cube is a cube. Any cubensis is the same with the exception of penis envy. That is the only cubensis that's treated almost as if it's a separate species.
I know, we treated it as a joke. But we knew it was powerful. I mean, I've eaten some. The last time I ate some, pure penis envy, it was about 1978. And I was out in the woods at a lake, and all I saw was purple black. Everything was purple black. And the wind was blowing, and even the wind was purple black. And they were pretty strong, but it's never been my mushroom of choice. I've always eaten cyanescence.
Interesting.
And I'm not an abuser of mushrooms. It didn't take much to get me altered state of consciousness. I mean, I can drink a couple of beers and get into an altered state of consciousness. And I don't mean drunk, I mean actually aware. So what I discovered is that, kind of by accident, is there was an entity attached to the cyanescence that I've never seen attached to any cubensis mushroom. And that entity used to talk to me. And so like when I'd come mushroom hunting here, I'd be heading that way. And for no reason I go that way, and there they are. Or if I'm in the woods looking for morels, I'm heading that way, and for no reason I flip around, go that way, and there they are. They've always kind of called to me. And so when I went to Thailand with Mushroom John, it really surprised me that he wasn't finding any mushrooms. I was finding most of them for him. He couldn't find the mushrooms.
And when you say call to you, do you mean that in a literal sense? Like you can actually hear a voice?
Imagine your mother being over by that tree over there, and you hear in your head, or you hear, son, come over here, and you look, and your mother's looking the other way, but you know you actually heard that. That's how it is. And a lot of times it isn't even hearing; it can be feeling. Because of the way my brain works, I tend to see everything visually. So when I'm in the woods, I can see the squirrel, the rabbit, the hawk, the plane, the car, the people, there's somebody following me. And so it just made that stronger. A good example is, I had a farm in eastern Washington, and I planted some strawberries. And I hadn't built a house yet. I had a garage and a tractor, but I had strawberries planted. And I went up there one day, and I was going to water everything, and I looked down, and there's 2 footprints by the strawberries. So I go into town, and I saw my sister-in-law, and I said, how are the strawberries? And she said, how do you know it was me that was eating the strawberries? I said, there were 2 footprints. Well, how do you know they were my footprints? Well, they told me, the footprints told me that was her. Now, they didn't say, hey, that was your sister-in-law. Everything's got an electromagnetic footprint. So when she stepped on that dirt, she left an electromagnetic footprint. And because of the things I do, I can read that electromagnetic footprint. But I don't see it as a footprint. I see it in my head as her. So I see the footprint, but I see her in my head.
And cubensis doesn't call to you that way?
No.
Why do you think that is?
No particular reason I can tell. I've never seen an entity in cubensis, but I saw one inside an essence. Mushroom John says he has, but I don't believe him. But a friend of mine who also does out-of-body stuff came over to my house one day, and we ate some mushrooms. And so if I'm not hot when I eat mushrooms, I'll get cold and stay cold. So I was making a fire so I could heat up before I got high. And so I lit some newspapers, and I passed them in front of her on the way to the fireplace, and they went out. So the wind came up and blew it out. And so I lit it again, and on the way to the fireplace, it blew out again. But it was like a wind. It was like fire. And I looked at her, and finally I just went over to the fireplace, put the paper in, and lit it. And the reason that happened is because she's like me. She has an expanded energy field, and I was getting in the way of the fire. So anyway, after that, we ate some sign essence, and I looked at the door, and under the door there was a golden light. And this thing came out from under the door like a swarm of bees and zoomed around the house. But the bees looked more like a lozenge shape, like this kind of lozenge shape. And they looked like gold that was on the verge of melting. But they flew around like bees. And so I was high on the mushrooms, and they hit me. And when they hit me, I got totally sober. And they came out the other side, and then I was high again. And then they went over and went through her. The same thing happened. They did that several times. Went under the door and went out. I opened the door, and under the bushes, everything was golden color under the bushes. And I've always felt them ever since. I may have even felt them before then, but that was definitely the ultimate thing.
And just to go back a second, you said that one reason the PE was so spectacular was not just the genetic manipulations that you did, but also a specific compost you were giving them. Is that something that could be replicated? What was the...
Well, I can go downtown and get it anytime. I mean, the only problem with that compost is you can only get a dump truck load. Other than that, it's freely available. It's readily available.
So what is it? It's just
it's just a wash common or compost, but not everybody handles it the same way. And there's a lot of EPA things now. And one of the problems with the compost now is the EPA. They're composting it on site. And so what they've done is all the bad things that used to invade the compost are now very vigorous. So all these molds that you can get, they're out of hand because the way they've been composted. They've been composted enough to destroy the woody matter, but they made them. They composted it so much that it's getting all these organisms in it, and so you got to throw away half the compost pile after a couple of days because you got all these moles that you don't want.
Moles.
Moles and a lot of other stuff. It's by helping keep nitrogen out of the water by composting it on site. They've encouraged all the things that grow in the compost to grow 10 times better, and so now the mushroom has to compensate. And so we used to throw about half the pile away, but then we got to a point where we could just go there and get the top of the pile and cook it right away and avoid that. But nobody had compost like us. I mean, it was the bomb.
Right.
But you got to. We take a 2-hour ride in a dump truck. Sometimes we'd hand shovel it to get to what we wanted. 2 hours back, and then you got to pile it up, and we used to super pasteurize it.
And based on your background in genetics, what do you think is going on with PE? What do you think you did?
All we did was make an individual that could overcome its genetic defects. I mean, we got an individual that refused to grow normally and got it to grow normally. But that was all manipulation. So we've got a sick individual with bad genes, and we clone it and make another sick individual with bad genes. But just like twins, things are never the same. So if you grow 10 individuals, one of them is going to be stronger than the other 9. So we kept picking the strongest individual to reproduce the strain, and the secondary condition was more bluing. So if a mushroom was huge but didn't blue, we wouldn't use it. We'd rather use a small one that blued a lot. So it was always having to do with the bluing. So all the strains that were ever sold were always manipulated the same way.
And this is naturally occurring bluing, or would you do a check of some kind by bruising it intentionally? How do you quantify the bluing?
You don't have to do any checking. You just touch them and the stuff would turn blue.
Yeah.
You'd cut it off the compost and the whole thing would be blue. See how this blue is? You would cut the mushroom and it looked like somebody had soaked it in blue ink, and like immediately.
Yeah.
The PEs that are out there are nothing like the original PEs, and only the strains that we had can reproduce that.
How are they different?
Well, other people have manipulated them, and to my knowledge, we're the only ones that manipulated them the way we did. We took a weak individual, made a strong individual out of it, as strong as we could make it, while keeping all the traits we wanted. So sure, the horse didn't look like a horse, it looked more like a donkey, but it had what we wanted. It was the gluing effect and the size. But, the size is no big deal. It's all in the food.
What about albino penis envy? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I've seen them.
What do you think of that?
Well, it's like anything else. If you want to get a white mushroom, then you just keep culturing the color you want until you get the color you want. We used to include this with the homestead mushroom kit. Notice how all the mushrooms are big?
Yeah.
Same food. Look at my hand here holding that little clump.
Wow.
Right here up front.
It's amazing work.
And it's any simpleton could do all this stuff. Luckily, I've had enough.
Amazon PE. What year is this?
Oh, that was sold with homestead mushroom kits until June of 2017.
Oh wow! So they're done with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dave, the owner, had a pacemaker put in, so he wanted to do other things before he died.
Right.
So anyway, the reason I'm getting rid of the photos, I got thousands of them. I take a lot.
I would love to archive this material for you. I can scan it and send it back to you.
Well, you know what? I tend to destroy everything I create. But I threw probably 500 pounds of pictures out already.
Oh, it's terrible.
But
Please don't. I mean, give them to me. I'll preserve them.
Well-
I find all of this historically really interesting.
you know what though? Is I've got about 30 hard drives full of stuff that people have never seen. You know how they talk about the penis envy looking like a penis?
Yeah.
I've got some that actually have the cleft, urethra cleft.
Really?
Yeah.
Could you find those photos?
Well, I went through about 10 of them, by hard drives. These are PEs. A friend of mine was growing them. He was the favorite grower. He also knew his science. Not that you really need any science for these. But if you're interested in any of these PEs, you're welcome to them.
Of course,
But they're not the best pictures. And these, I don't know if I'd want them in there. They're a little too much. But singly like that doesn't look bad. But like this, it's a little.
You don't like the composition of the photo?
No, I don't like the contents.
Oh, it's too much. Like
Yeah.
it looks like a illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The guy's not around here anymore. And the other guy, Jules Stevens, he's dead, so it doesn't know much. Those are the two main people. But yeah, you're welcome to like all these.
It's beautiful. Thank you. It's very kind of you.
Remember Jules Stevens? He wasn't a science guy. He wanted the book to be a hippie book. I wanted it to be a science book, and we never got to the place where I wanted it. He's using this mycelium to feed the patch. It's a waste of time.
Huh.
He should have just planted the mycelium. So he planted some roses, and he said, "Can I plant some of these?" So we planted some of those, and that's what came up. The very next year, we planted them in the spring. That same fall, they were up. And I think you can even see the roses in some of them, but you can have those too.
Wow.
And these, actually, they're in that book. You could probably have those, Pale Cistus. Now, just all these mushrooms that are in here, they're all from that one patch. And to my knowledge, there were like 300 or 400 pounds of fresh cyanescence picked out of that in about 6 weeks.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And actually, I've got videos of more than you're ever going to see here. I got 3D video, high definition UHF video.
Oh, I'd love to help you archive some of it. I mean, I really, you must be following the pharmaceutical commercialization of psilocybin right now.
Yeah. In fact, Homestead just sold out to one of those guys.
It's become a huge industry. There's multiple publicly traded stocks on the market right now that are psilocybin stocks. And I feel that people like you, who are a huge part of this history, it sounds like you don't necessarily want credit for your work, but I think that whether you want the credit or not, people should be able to recognize your historical contributions to all of this.
Yeah, I understand all that. In fact, my niece, who you talked to, she's more in your way of thinking. Most of my other family is totally different.
This whole era of being afraid of it, of being afraid of it being illegal, it's all going to be different very soon. And then a lot of the people that were afraid to talk about it or didn't want the attention, I mean, that's history that's lost. It will go directly from Maria Sabina and R. Gordon Wasson to 21st century.
Well, funny you should say that. I've given away a lot of things in my life, including all my money about 3 times. Things like that aren't important to me. They never have been. When Microsoft Windows first came out, the very first Windows, I got this group together, and we started writing a software where if you were a band, we could put you on our software, and me in New York could get into your file and listen to your band play and book you. Before Google, before any of those guys.
Yeah.
But the guy we had writing the software wanted to get paid now, so he missed the whole thing because he wanted to get paid now. Yeah, we wrote half the software too. We checked it worked. That orange cleaner you see everywhere, you clean your grease off your hands.
Yeah.
I discovered that when I was in college. I was always working on my car, and I was always eating oranges, and I realized that would take the grease off my hands. So I told everybody in the world about that. Discovered it a long time ago.
Yeah.
All my life, people have always kind of tried to jump on my boat. And the next thing you know, they're trying to change what I'm doing because they think their thing is better.
Yeah.
And so I just as well stay away from people and do my thing and do it my way. The only reason I'm actually talking to you about this is the story about how all this happened, and a bloody letter, and Terrence McKenna, just baloney from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And if I did meet Terrence, I think he would have been busy talking to everybody else who was trying to get to him. I did visit Pollock, and I had a friend who had a fish store, and he had a friend who bought saltwater mix for his fish. And so I stopped and saw Pollock, his place, and then I stayed down there. But that's the last time I saw Pollock. He never told me anything. He just showed me what he was doing. He was really happy because he could go to the zoo and get lion's dung and all this other stuff to grow his mushrooms on. And we didn't talk about anything substantial, and he never talked about any mushrooms other than normal stuff.
Never talked about sclerotia?
Nothing.
Camote?
Well, yeah, tempenensis.
Yeah.
But yeah, he talked about that, but never about any specific cubensis mushroom doing anything.
Yeah.
And this story about I don't know where it came from, about the bloody letter with the spore print in it. He didn't even have my address, so there's no way he could get anything to me.
Yeah.
In fact, the reason I've been the way I am is about a week after the book came out, I answered the door, and this guy's come from Spokane, which is on the other side of Washington. And he says, "I want to know everything you know about mushrooms." And I closed the door on him. And then the only way you could get a hold of me was to call the operator, have the operator call me and ask me if I wanted to talk to you.
Yeah.
I had an unlisted, unpublished number because I didn't want that anymore. And I don't know these guys.
Right. Do you remember what year it was that you visited Pollock in San Antonio?
You know what? That's way in the way back.
Because you all had books coming out around the same time. It was...
Right. Everybody's writing a book at about the same time. In fact, I have most of them.
Yeah.
At home, yeah. If you ever want to see them.
I'd love to, yeah.
Yeah, everybody showed up. There was a conference here, and everybody showed up with their book they were pushing. Our book wasn't out yet.
Yeah.
And actually, the reason our book came out was Homestead. He was selling counterculture books, and he wanted to sell a mushroom book. And my neighbor wrote some information he stole from everybody. And that was the first one.
What book was that?
The one with the red mascara on the cover. The little book, not much bigger than this. A friend of mine wrote How to Grow Pot Indoors Under Lights.
Yeah.
I met him, and he happened to know my neighbor. And so I met him. He later wrote a book before we got ours out. But he went down to the university and took all the books from one of the professors there. Like everybody else, we all borrowed the same pictures. This is one of my favorite TV pictures.
Wow.
Those are small. Those bags that are here, the newest ones.
Yeah.
The bags are actually, when you blow up a bag with too much air,
Yeah.
they look like that because there were so many mushrooms that actually cracked the top of the bag open.
Oh, wow.
But you notice the spores have gone white. They got to be sporeless. You know how I told you that the mushrooms talk to me?
Yeah.
I drove to the coast of Washington and Oregon, got on the other side of the Columbia River, and I went to look for azurescence. And so I could see the bridge to cross over to Oregon, and then there was a little mini rest stop where there was a rock with a sign on it. I think it was Lewis and Clark had been there or something. And I was reading that, and I looked down at my feet, and there was one of these azures. Took it home, and those all came from it.
Wow.
See, I never even made it to where I was going to find the azures. It was already just waiting for me there already.
And do you have any memories of Pollock or those other early players in this? I mean, he sounded like he was quite a character.
The only thing I remember was the fact that he like going to the zoo to try all these different kind of poops. But again, my deal has always been, I want it to be my deal. I don't want it to be a rehash of your deal.
Right.
And so it's like all the out-of-body stuff. I didn't want to learn from somebody else. I wanted to learn it myself.
Yeah.
And as a scientist, a lab guy, I'm one of the best there is, if I do say so myself. And so, and in my life, I've always done everything intuitively. Nobody has to tell me how to do something. I needed a garage, I built a garage. I needed a pasteurizer, I built a pasteurizer. I just went and got the parts.
Yeah.
I have the ability to see just about anything I want.
Why do you think mushrooms produce psilocybin? What is your take on that?
I think the mushrooms have psilocybin for probably some way of protecting themselves. Yeah. If you eat something that's yucky, you're not going to eat it again. So maybe animals were eating the mushrooms, and one way to save themselves is to have a chemical that they don't like.
Yeah.
Like other things. Like the butterfly. It's got the color yellow and black. That means it's poisonous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you could look at it from a different point of view and say that nature evolved this way to help humans. You could do that. I think nature is just being nature. It's protecting itself. It's some kind of there's some kind of use for the mushroom for that chemical.
Yeah, I agree.
We just came stumbling along and ate some and decided we liked it.
Right.
I go out in nature all the time, and it's like I can go down the highway, and by reading the signs on the side of the road, I can tell you where the mushrooms are. But you have to know what to look for in those signs.
Yeah.
I can look on the mountain over there, and I can tell you where the chanterelles are and where the boletes are just from the highway. I spend a lot of time in the woods. I go out in the middle of nowhere by myself, where I can't be disturbed, and I just sit there and absorb everything. And so, to me, it's I've never thought about why they have psilocybin. It's more like, why not?
Right, and I agree, but it sounds like you also have a non-materialist connection with them. That makes sense from a materialist perspective, that it's just a thing that evolved and it serves the mushroom in one way or another, but it sounds like you also have a connection with them that exists beyond that. Do you think that's something that's more in you than in the mushroom? How do you explain that feeling of a supernatural connection to the mushrooms?
Well, you have to look at it from my original perspective. My friend finds some mushrooms down the road here. I come and pick them. I look what's there. And the first thing I notice is there's wood chips ground into the dirt. So I get some wood chips and I get some spores and throw them together, and guess what? Up come the mushrooms. I've always intuitively been able to just see things. I call it see feeling. I can feel with my eyes and I can see with my feelings, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my problems that I have is, you say something, and I say it back to you, and you say, "No, I didn't say that." And that's because sometimes I don't know if I'm listening to your voice or if I'm listening to your head. I can hear you thinking, not necessarily you right now, but it's like this friend of mine. We were in Jakarta, and she was wearing a short skirt, and she laid down in the bed next to me, and I heard her say, I wonder what it'll do." Well, she didn't speak it, she thought it, and I heard her. My ex-wife, she said something one time, and I repeated it to her. I said, "No, I didn't say that." I said, "Well, yes, you did." "Well, it's because I can't always tell if I'm hearing your head or hearing your voice. And it's always been that way for me. So I'm already dealing in nebulous places. What's so hard about hearing mushrooms compared to hearing you?"
Right. Yeah.
But, it's like, to me, mushrooms are like little kids in the forest. they'll be found if they want to be found, and they won't if they don't want to. But it's like being a hunter. If you're going to hunt elk, you go to where the elk are. And so, for me, knowledge is basically the only thing I want. One time I spent probably an hour and a half staring at a raindrop, watching it fall off a leaf. Not because I wanted to see the water drop, but because I wanted to know the physics of that water dropping, that one drop of water. And so I have the patience to take all day to do that if I want. But my head isn't seeing a little drop of water dropping. My head is seeing all the physics.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been that way. When I was young, we didn't have any money. I made all my toys. I made my own sled. I made my own slingshot. I made my own bow and arrow. Nobody showed me. Nobody taught me. I knew what they looked like, so I just made one. The pasteurizer. I knew what I wanted. I bought the metal from Boeing. I made it. No plan, nothing. So a way of looking at how I see things is, I built a pasteurizer. And I built it behind my house. I had a friend of mine, the guy who grew those bins of PEs. I had him over and he built it for me. And what happened was I was in the kitchen of my house and I was looking out the window and I see this compost bin out in the backyard. So I called my friend and I told him I wanted this much wood, I wanted to cut this size and put together this way. And he did. And he came in and said, well, this isn't going to work. And I do this with the wood. And I said, okay. So it only worked like 90% as well as it should have. But it worked about 200% better than I thought it was going to work. So anyway, it was in my backyard. And it was there for about a week. So one day I took a ladder and I climbed the ladder and I'm taking photos of it. And I realized that the photos I'm taking are what I saw through the kitchen window weeks ago that I got the plan to build it from.
Oh, wow. Huh.
So which came first? When I looked out the window, there was nothing, and then I looked out the window again, and there it was. So I built one like what I saw, and there it was in the present. I've always been that way. And so I can't say that it's the mushrooms, but the mushrooms put me in that state of mind where things are more believable.
Right.
You know how, if you're a real scientist, you always have that doubt in your head, like, where's the proof? There's got to be some proof.
Yeah.
And I've always tried to supply the proof.
Right.
To myself more than anything else. I don't care what you think about what I'm doing. I want to prove it to myself.
Right.
But my grandfather has a little bit of it. And my mom used to say I was a brujo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when one of my sisters first got married, every time I walked into the room, her family, they'd all start saying, brujo, brujo, and they'd all quiet down and they wouldn't turn their backs on me. They always had to see what I was doing.
And do you think that was partially because of surviving the almost fatal gunshot wound, or?
I've always had it, but it just made it easier.
And what about Stamets? Did you have much interaction with Stamets?
A bit when he was like 19. I knew him since then. He apparently mentions my name on occasion. These are some PEs that got used to him, and so my friend threw them in the backyard, and this is what came out.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. They almost look like a bow lead or something. Very...
Yeah, they're huge. They were... let me skip to the bottom.
Why do you think it is that this form is never found in nature, this mutation? Do you think it's has something about it that's maladaptive?
I would say that it probably did show up in nature. I thought there was going to be a poster at the bottom, but... I went to Thailand, Cambodia with Mushroom John. Then a few years later, I went with. See how it has this right here?
Yeah.
Well, some of them actually have a cleft right there, and like a little hole, just like a penis does, and then that cleft kind of comes down. I didn't find any on the last time I went through the photos.
Penis envy with a penis hole. Wow.
So I'm not sure what else you want to know.
Was the penis shape purely accidental? Was that something that you were ever thinking, like, I can selectively breed this to make it look even more like a penis if I put my mind to it?
No, it wasn't about the penis at all.
Yeah.
When we were first mushroom hunting, three of us would go out, and one of them was the taster. This guy was a drug freak. He would taste anything. And so if we thought it was a psilocybin, he'd taste it. Luckily, he wasn't, they weren't hardy mushrooms like we got Coprophila and Liberty Cabs. Before Stunsiais, there were Peliculosa.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was always saying, well, you can taste it, but you can taste psilocybin. And so you could taste it, but it didn't get him very high. And sometimes you get like a little buzz. And so it was always about a stronger and stronger mushroom. And then we found the cyanescens, and they were the strongest ones around. And so even though it was never in the front of my mind, I knew they were getting stronger just because of what I was doing with them. But since I never really ate them, it didn't really matter to me. And then they started getting like penises, but it wasn't that the penis shape was chosen for. It was always the biggest one and the bluest one. It was never about looking like a penis or not looking like a penis. It just so happened that it evolved that way. We didn't stop it from evolving that way, but we didn't force it to evolve that way. So there are some mushrooms that actually look like somebody cut your penis off. I mean, they could put it on and it looked the same. We didn't actually reproduce those. They just happened to show up in the batch. And it was always comedy for us. I mean, I don't have much of a funny bone, but to me, it's funny.
I think it's funny to a lot of people. I mean, it's even been a problem historically when they find some Mesoamerican stone mushroom. There's always a question, is it a mushroom or is it a penis?
Yeah. Well, the only people that had a problem with the penis were the girls when they ate them.
Mm-hmm.
That they always would laugh about the idea of their chewing on a penis. And they'd laugh about it. But other than that, it was... Nobody ever asked for penis mushrooms. They asked for Amazons.
Yeah.
And then later, when we called them PEs, then they would ask for PEs.
Yeah.
But since I wasn't in that business, I only saw the effects of people when they encountered them.
Are you proud? I mean, it's a pretty big contribution to the world of psychedelic mushrooms.
To me, it's just comedy. I mean, I laugh at the stories. Every time I hear the word legend, I could have fallen off my seat. I laugh so hard. It's like none of this stuff is important to me, and that's where I am. I've always been here. It's like nothing is important to me. It's, I've given money to old ladies to get off the street. I've given all my money away to help other people. None of this is important to me, and I think probably is because of my dying. Is like I died and then I was back, and the whole world was different, and it took me a long time to start seeing the world the same. I mean, for a long time, it was hard to make sense of the world. I had to start when I was 10 years old, and I had to start using logic to try to explain the world because it didn't make sense. And so the whole thing with the mushrooms, the whole thing with everything I do has always been trying to find my place in the universe. It had nothing to do with people, had nothing to do with creating anything. It just has to do with where I am in space and time.
Do you think it worked? Do you think you've learned something from them?
Well, one thing is I'm not afraid of dying. I know what it's all about. I've done it already. I've gone in the back door too. I've met death. He doesn't scare me either. Never has. I think what the mushrooms did is they accentuated that part that the normal the normal system of the universe is you live, then you die. And you don't have to be afraid of it. It's not scary. And some people think it's scary, but it's not scary. I mean, dying is easy. You know, I always look at it that way. Dying is easy. Living is hard. Dying is easy. And for me, it's I've never thought in the ways that people ask me if I think that way.
Mm-hmm.
It just never comes to my mind. But you know, it's like a young girl could come by here and start stripping in front of me, and I tell her to put her clothes back on,
Mm-hmm.
because to me that's logical. Jumping her bones isn't logical.
Yeah.
You know, I was raised in a certain way. I've got a certain way that I live my life. And the only reason I'm even doing this is, I guess it got to the point of ridiculousness that it needed to be straightened out.
Yeah,
I mean,
agree.
I mean, I don't really care if it helps XYZ guy to figure it out or makes that guy over there happy. Is, you know, the truth is the truth, and that's all there is.
Right. Well, I
And,
appreciate it. I really do.
well, not a lot of people have this information, and my problem is when I get information, I don't get a little bit, I get a lot. As you can see, I mean, this is nothing. I mean, I've got computers full of stuff. In fact, I had a computer crash and it took thousands of photos, but I don't care. It's like, I can reproduce anything.
Yeah.
And a lot of the great stuff was on that computer. I've even got the hard drive, but it's the hard drive that's dead.
Mm.
But I've got some hidden gems in hard drives right now that people would love to see. I just doing other stuff.
Well, I understand where you're coming from, but I really do think that this is an important history, and you know, it impacts a lot of people. Other people will make up stories. Other people will fill in the blanks with whatever they want, and as this becomes a bigger part of our culture, I think people are going to not only want to know, but need to know about the people that made all this possible.
Well, you know, if my name never came up, it would never bother me.
Yeah.
Even like Richard G, that's not me.
Right.
But you know, it's a strange feeling. It's like if you're sitting there and you almost get run over by a car. It's like, wow, you know, that was close.
Yeah.
And a lot of emotions kind of well up. After I got shot, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see me. There was somebody else in the mirror. And there's always been this somebody else in the mirror. And I know why, because I have a fractured personality from being beat up by my first grade teacher all the time.
Oh.
But for me, it was always about my journey, where I come from, where I'm going, what I am. And there was about 20 years in my life where everybody around me was scared to death of me. They were all my friends, but they wouldn't turn their back on me because I knew too much. And so I'm basically what's the word? Like those guys who used to go in the caves and hang out and do all their thinking away from people.
A monk?
Yeah, kind of like a monk,
Yeah.
but not a monk. They call them
Ascetic,
something else,
yeah.
where they retreat from society and just do their thinking without
hermit?
any hermit.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I found is, like Jules Stevens, he was always trying to tell me a better way to do things. Well, he didn't know the science, so how could he show me a better way? But I put up with it for a long time.
Did he stay connected to mushrooms until the end?
Yes and no. His interest in the mushrooms was how they could help him monetarily.
Mm-hmm.
That was never my interest, even though I made money off them. So he wanted to know all about growing them because he could sell them. I wanted to grow them because I could. So he never got into the spirituality of it.
Mm-hmm.
He never got into anything other than they were a money-making opportunity. But, it was like almost 10 years before he died that I quit talking to him, because he came to my house one day and he said, you should do this, you should do this. And I said, no, you should do it, because you're the one that wants it to be that way.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And he didn't like that, because he's like Trump. It has to be about him. And so he didn't like it that it wasn't about him. And anything to do with the mushrooms was always about me, because all his friends knew that I was the one that knew it, the science. He came up with some of the money, and that was his deal in the book.
Yeah.
But he didn't know the science. He didn't use the right terminology. He didn't know how to play things out. He didn't know anything about that.
Right.
And so, no, he didn't stay in it to the end, because he left town and there was no business for him with it.
Yeah.
I've always had friends that were interested, so I've always kept the PEs going for them. But I was always doing something else.
Right. Was he not growing them at the end, or was he?
He never knew how to grow them.
Oh, wow.
If I didn't give him the stuff, he couldn't grow them.
Ha. That's funny.
There was the hippie and the scientist.
Yeah.
He was the hippie.
Yeah.
That's why the book is a hippie book.
What did he do? What was his job? He ran a dance studio or something?
No, he cut hair.
Oh, he cut hair. Oh, is he the original hairstylist?
Yeah.
I see.
But you see, you walk in and you get a haircut from him, he's going to make $600 on you. And this is almost 50 years ago.
So he was the hairstylist that first gave you the Amazonian.
He's the hairstylist that had the friend who got his hands on an Amazon.
I see.
His friend got a hold of a pound of dry Amazons.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend, Jules Stevens, he got sold on one of those. And that's what I saw.
I see.
So Terrence McKenna didn't pick peas in the Amazon.
Right.
He picked a strain or strains. And nobody had the pea before we made it.
Right.
And a lot of people didn't know it was the pea until we started calling it the PE.
Right.
And in the beginning, it was just another mushroom. It was no big deal. And the fact that it got stronger was what made it a big deal.
Yeah.
I know some of the people who sold them around town. There's a bigger margin on the peas.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people who turned them down because they were too strong.
Right.
And back in those days, more was better. Stronger was better. Everybody was overdoing everything. Talking about overdoing, you don't find mushrooms around here anymore. They're overpicked.
I hear both camps. Some people say when you pick them, it causes spore dispersal and that will help propagate them across whatever territory that you carry them. But then other people think that they can be over harvested like anything else.
Well, that first patch I found down there, I came by one day and I was picking, and this other guy came by and started picking next to me. And I said, wait a minute. I left all those little pins there so they'd grow up.
I see, yeah.
And I talked him out of picking them. Then I went away and I flipped around, came back, and he was picking them.
Yeah.
And so the interesting part is I used to come in here and I would follow the wind currents. So I'd pick some mushrooms here or take pictures here. I'd follow the wind currents and they're over there. We'd go around the corner, they're over there. And they would go with the currents. And you just kind of follow the current and you could find the patches. And then people started coming here and overpicking. And then it'd be a yearly thing. This year they'd be overpicked, next year they wouldn't come up. Then they come up again, they'd be overpicked. And so but the second problem is they're putting down too many chips. So they like it like this, all dried up, several years old. They don't get to do that anymore. They put fresh acidity chips in the springtime, and they continue all through the summer, and the next year they do it again. So the mushrooms never get out of that acidity soil until they don't come up. And so last year there were no patches that came up last year in here. And the year before that, there were 2 patches only that came up in here. And one of those patches died after that. And this year I know of 1 patch, maybe 2 that might be here, and that's it. But there used to be hundreds of patches.
Right.
Just like those pictures you saw, it used to be like that in here too.
Sad. Do you think there's anything people can do to bring them back?
Quit picking them. Grow them and throw out the spores. And I understand if I pick this mushroom, I'm shaking it and I'm putting out spores. But maybe I'm putting out 100,000 spores by doing that. But if you leave them on the ground, they put out billions. So eventually, works against you.
Right.
And Mushroom John was one of the worst. He picked everything to the ground. In fact, there's a joke about Mushroom John around here. People would follow him and find out where his patches were, and then later they go ahead of him and pick them. So when he got there, they were already gone. But he was so dumb about it that he'd be over there, and everybody could see that he's picking mushrooms, and so they all knew where his patches was. And he called them all his patches. He'd get there and he'd throw a tantrum. Somebody picked my patch. Well, it's not his patch. It's just a patch. But everything in town was his patch. We always laughed at him. And the only reason I know him is that phone call. Like, somebody talked to me and he just happened to be in the room and I couldn't get rid of him again. It took me, 15 years to get rid of him again? And that's why he doesn't know about the PEs. He wasn't around me when the PEs were being changed and all that. He came at the end of it. And, don't you think that's an interesting story about the hookers?
It is, yeah.
Everybody wanted to hear that story. You think Mushroom John wouldn't have heard it? Especially since it was getting kids money?
I don't know. He had actually bragged about lying to me about it on the Shroomery at one point. So he, for whatever reason, wanted to spread misinformation.
Right,
I don't know.
Because we had a deal. I told him I'd give him some of these kits if he got me different sport prints. So he'd go to Thailand and I'd get a sprint or two from him and I'd give him some bags. Well, one day he talked to somebody and they made a deal. And this was for some little island out in the middle of the Pacific. And he got one print. It was really faint, worse than the PE ones. And he'd already made a deal for money with the guy he got him from. And so the deal I had with him is, when I have the inclination and the time and the stuff, I'll make you some kits. But don't count on it when you want it. It's going to be on my time. And so he brought me this print. And I put it on plates. Nothing happened. I put it on plates again. There were 3 spots where there were spores. They weren't going to do anything. Plated it again. There was monokaryotic on 2 different plates. Threw them on top of each other. Nothing happened. So meanwhile, he's fuming because he hasn't got prints to sell. He's already made this deal for $1,400 in prints he's going to get off these kits I make. Well, the original print, the spores are no good. He can't get what he wants. And so I never get sick, but for some reason, I must have been reading in the car or something. I get car sick. I can't read in the car. And it didn't feel well, so I was going to do something for him. I thought, I'm not going to bother. And then I went on vacation that I'd already planned. I was gone for a month. So I get back and he calls me and he says, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. I said, oh, why? I said, I just talked to my daughter and son, and I told them to make up stories about you, about having a lot of drugs and selling a lot of drugs, so you can get arrested and go to prison forever. And I offered to throw him out the window right there and then. And I told him, I don't care. I'll take the firing squad. I'll take death penalty. I'll throw you out the window. He said, no, I'm okay. Well, I told him, if he ever crossed my path, he's in jeopardy. I don't want him anywhere near me. I've seen him twice since then. One over here at the corner. He didn't recognize me because he's old and fat, and I never changed. And a lot of people don't recognize me because I don't change. I pretty much stay the same. And one time I was at a mushroom show. I was bending over taking a photo, and I saw him out the corner of my eye. And I just said, hey, John. And he left and disappeared because he knew better. And if he comes crossing about here, he's in jeopardy because he's not allowed to cross my path.
Yeah.
I'm serious. It's a dead-end road for him.
Yeah.
And, I'm within my rights. Somebody want to lie it like that. Especially after benefiting from me for all those years.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that he's got those characteristics. I mean, it's one thing getting wacky emails from him or having him insult you on the Shroomery. It's another thing having him threaten to ruin your life and get you arrested. So I can completely understand why you...
Well, he called me a lunatic or something similar. And you kind of just left it off in your article where he said he owes me $1,400. And you said something like, "Oh yeah," or something. And who was I getting at? When I was doing all this out of body stuff, remember I told you I did some sorcery.
Yeah.
I really didn't know how to do that. And there's an unfortunate circumstance in my life where I don't completely run my life completely 100%. So you don't want to threaten me because some part of me will not like it. I even order it away and it'll go over there and sneak back around and come up from behind me. It sounds all crazy, but you don't want to fool with me. You know, there are other powers bigger than me that are taking care of me.
Yeah.
And I'd rather threaten that guy physically than have part of me come and show up in the middle of the night and throw him out the window.
Yeah. Sounds like he's suffering on his own. I don't think he needs any kind of spiritual.
But you know, one of the reasons I keep to myself is I have brain damage, and you can't do repetitive things to me.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say, I'm going to punch you, I'm going to punch you. By the time you say it the fourth time, I'm punching you because it's repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
And he repetitively did too many things.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's no going back. And I'm not a physical person, but I never back down from anybody. I don't care how big they are, who they are. I'm too little to back down from people. You know, they'll pick on me.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons I spend a lot of my time alone anyway, is I knew too much for a long time. And so do I want to take it out on you that I know too much? Is it your fault that I know too much? Is it my fault that I know too much? You know, there's a lot of questions you got to ask. And so the reason he stays away from me, he's scared of me.
Yeah.
And I like that.
And what do you see the future of all this, having been involved in this world for 45, 50 years, however long it's been?
It's been since 1973.
So
The fall of 1973. Well, my friend who started me on this has been dead for a long time. Just about everybody that I dealt with this thing have been dead for a long time. Homestead was the one person I've known a long time and have still know. And he just sold his mailing list to some company who went public
mm-hmm.
a couple of months ago. And I guess they're going to resurrect the mushroom kit.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't mention me, so I think they're resurrecting the kit before mine, which wasn't that good. It was made by another person I know. I forget what his name is at the moment. And if they're trying to get a hold of me, I wouldn't know because I don't answer my phone to anybody I don't know. And I really don't care. But if they're trying to reproduce a homestead kit, they've got my instructions, so anybody with a little knowledge could reproduce it.
Do you still sell kits?
Mm.
No.
Haven't done that in a long time. I was helping Homestead make kits for a long time, but that ended in spring of 17 when he closed down.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people wanted to keep buying the kits. He just didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Plus, he had this alternative book business, and the book business, not his, just that all book business went down. You know, with internet, you don't need a book; you just look it up.
Right.
And so, his book business just basically disappeared. So the only thing keeping him alive was the mushroom kits. So that was like the last 5 years of his business was staying alive on the mushroom kits.
Right.
But you know, it's like anything else. Expenses get up. Everybody's got big expenses.
Yeah.
And then the compost got hard to get. You couldn't just go pick up load anymore. You had to get a dump truck load, and you had to make an appointment. And I didn't need to do it anymore.
Do you have any opinion about the pharmaceutical introduction of psilocybin as a synthetic product?
No. Jewel Stevens, his friends used to call him the Jewel. They made a big deal out of it. He made him a lot of money. But anyway, he was complaining that he needed to smoke pot every day whenever he wanted to, and the law wouldn't let him. And I said, well, just wait 50 years and all the people in power will die, and then you can smoke all the pot you want. So I look at the psilocybin the same way. All the people in power have died, and the people with the new ideas are here, and that's why it's changing. Everything changes like that. You just have to let the generation ahead of you die off, and your ideas come to the forefront. So here we are. I've left the business, but the ideas are still there. Somebody's starting something new. My girlfriend isn't inclined. She knows about all this, but she's not inclined. And she's not even inclined for me to be here. But for me, there's the right thing and the wrong thing. And there's no reason to say the wrong thing just to spite somebody. And the only reason you're getting this information is because I'm the only one who's got it.
It's true.
There's a reason for that. And so, I don't care about Mushroom John. I don't care if he lives or dies. I don't care if he comes around the corner. The mushrooms have never told me that I need to make a lot of money or I need to be nice or anything. They're just mushrooms. But, I went through a period where I could hear the moon talking to me. I could hear the trees talking to me. I still do. I can hear everything talking to me. Everything always talks to me. And so my head's in a different space because I have different input. I had some cops come to my house. I had a really bad landlord one time. He was always hanging around. You're not supposed to be hanging around your tenants' places. There's the laws against that. But he was always hanging around. And then I decided to paint the house. He didn't give me enough paint to paint it, but I bought my own. I decided to paint the house so it was all closed up. And he called the cops because he thought I was growing mushrooms, which I wasn't. Well, technically I was. And so anyway, I get up in the morning and I've had this mushroom kit out and I threw it out on a chair outside because it's too wet, because it had been caught in the rain. And it was oyster mushrooms. No, it was not matsutake. Shiitake. They were shiitake mushrooms. So anyway, they were too wet because I'd left them in the sun too long with taking pictures of them, and so I threw them on a chair. So these two detectives come by, and this guy was painting my house, and they asked him where I was and when I was going to be back, and then one of them looked at the chair and saw the shiitakes, and he said, "Okay, let's go." And so I get home about half an hour later, and my friend says, "Hey, the cops were here, and they want to talk to you." And I said, and he says, they're probably going to come back. I said, "No, they're not." "Yeah, I think they're going to come back." I said, "No, they saw those mushrooms on the table and they're satisfied they won't." So, why did the mushrooms end up out there? They didn't have to be out there that day. I just put them out unknowingly, but that's the way my life works. Is they were conveniently in a place where the cops could see them and they could see what I was growing indoors, and I was off the hook.
It's horrible that he would do that to you, though. But yeah, it's...
Well, no, but what I'm saying, though, is something always in me always senses what's coming up. And so whatever sense that was happening through those mushrooms out there for the cops to see. And so, that's my association with the mushrooms is everything talks to me. They're just another thing that talks to me.
Right.
But, there's nothing talking to me now, but like if somebody was sneaking up behind me, I'd know it. I mean, I was in high school one time and I'm walking out the door and I have books in both hands and I hear this voice behind me say my name, and as I turn around I bob my head because there's fists already flying. How did I know they were flying? I just knew.
Right.
As soon as he said my name, I knew they were flying.
Right.
And so, the mushrooms just help. It's kind of like the cherry on top.
Yeah.
It's not the main thing. It's just another thing.
Yeah.
And really, Jules Stevens was trying to cure somebody with mushrooms for cancer.
Mm-hmm.
They died, but he doesn't know enough about science to know about dosage or all that stuff. And it might have been too late. There's bound to be some benefit from all this. If nothing else, it's people just get high.
Oh, I think there is. They're in clinical trials right now as a treatment for depression, and the results are very promising. And it's going to be an FDA approved treatment probably within the next 5 years.
Yeah, I've heard of that. And my comment has always been about psilocybins is they never lie to you. They always tell you the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. And so if I ate some mushrooms right now and I didn't like you, they'd reiterate that.
Yeah.
Or they would say, well, you can show up tomorrow, and you would.
Yeah.
So, but one of my old stories is if there's a rock over there and I trip on it, the next time what I do is I tell that rock never trip me again, and I'll never trip on that rock again. And people say, well, that's just you. No, it isn't just me. I believe that everything has its own volition, even a rock. It can trip you or not trip you. It's up to him. I believe everything's alive. And to me, everything is alive. So that's why I like this park. There's a lot of life here. It just happens to be that there's mushrooms here too.
Are you interested in other psychedelics other than psilocybin?
I tried a peyote button once. It was so bad that I spit it out. I just didn't like it. One time, Jules Stevens and a friend of his had some opium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was like chewing gum tacky.
Mm-hmm.
And it put a film on my tongue. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
It tasted terrible. And that's about my extent of other chemicals. I've never been a chemical person. I've been given cocaine, I just give it away.
Right.
I've been given LSD, I just give that away.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got enough in my brain I don't need psychedelics. I mean, you've heard me talk about all this stuff, You'd think somebody be on high psychedelics talking like that. I don't have to be on psychedelics.
Right.
But my whole family knows me. They know how I am. It's like I was dating this woman one time, and whenever I date somebody new, I always talk to them like I talked to you just now, because I want them to understand what they're getting into. So anyway, this woman invited me over to dinner, and she fed me so much that too many carbs made me sleepy, and I'd had a long day of work. So I went to the bathroom, and I was so sleepy, I just went straight to the bedroom and went head first into the bed. And so I wake up the next morning, and I look around, and she wakes up, and I'm wearing all my clothes, she's wearing all her clothes. And I said, anything happened last night? I said, no. I said, are you sure? I said, no. And I said, are you sure? I said, well, I woke up in the middle of the night, and you were blue and floating 6 inches above the bed, but you said that might happen, so I just went back to sleep. So, I have so many experiences like that it's hard not to believe what's happening.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like when I go to Thailand, I don't know, it's been about 3 trips ago, I can't sleep with my head north, especially if I'm in a place like Thailand. Anyway, I had my head north, and I woke up in the middle of the night because I was vibrating too much. And it's like, when a engine's going, like, you can feel the vibration. I do that. And so I was vibrating, and I started slapping my face to try to get it to stop. And so then I went in the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror, and my face was golden color. All of me was gold color. And I splashed some water in my face and slapped my face, and it wouldn't go away, and I stayed gold. And then I tried to go to sleep, and I couldn't, so I flipped the bed around and had put my head to the south. And finally it went away. And sometimes when I'll be sleeping, I'll wake up and the whole room will light up like light bulb. The light's coming out of me. So, with stuff like that happening, having a psilocybin trip is nothing to me.
Right.
I'm in a constant state of that. Now, this girlfriend of mine, she doesn't like any of that. And so I'm sleeping with my head east or west, so it doesn't happen. But when she's gone, I start vibrating again because she's not around. And the interesting part is if I'm next to you and I'm vibrating, they'll go right into you, start vibrating in you. I mean, it's like a contact thing. It's like you'll start going,
Wow.
and I've done a lot of experiments with stuff. So I've proven it to myself. That's the way I am. I always do experiments on people. One time I was sitting in the living room and we had some visitors from Liechtenstein,
Mm-hmm.
and they were talking about sailing, and they were in the kitchen, living room, dining room, and I was in the living room. And so I looked at this girl, and I sent one of those things out of my belly and poked her in the side. And she finished talking, and she came over to me and she said, "Was that you?" And I've got lots of people that recognize what I do without knowing what I'm doing. So it doesn't count if I tell you what's going to happen.
Right.
And so I'm actually thinking of getting back to that, not so much mushrooms. But as long as I'm with this woman, it's like hard to do because she's not interested in seeing that part of me.
What is she interested in?
Well, she knew Homestead Dave before I did.
Okay.
Through other mutual people, or maybe not before I did, but she interacted with him more because her husband knew him.
Mm-hmm.
And Homestead, Dave from Homestead, that was where all the mushroom kits came from. So she's okay with that, but she's always thought that what I talk about is always a trip, but it's not a trip. I'm talking about real life sort of stuff. So when I say I can touch you from here, I'm not joking. It's like the only problem with proving it to you is it could be traumatic on you. I mean, it's like one of my neighbors said she'd like to see a ghost. Well, she doesn't really want to see a ghost. The idea of seeing a ghost is, maybe like interesting, but it's not really. Because once you see one, you got to deal with them. And if you've never dealt with a ghost, you don't know what's going to happen. And I've dealt with ghosts a lot of times, and you got to be really careful. You don't want to get into something you don't understand. Give you for instance, one of my roommates, I was working, happened to be about the time where I first got into the mushrooms, and he was taking a bath, and he was cold, so he put a heater in there. So he calls me, he's blowing out the fuse. So I tell him it's on the porch, and so he goes and calls me back and said, "No, I can't find it." So I said, "Well, there's another fuse box in the basement." So he goes down to the basement, and then I get a call from him, and I said, "Did you find it?" He said, "No. Something happened." I said, "What happened?" "Well, I'll tell you when you get home." So I get home, and he's white, but he's whiter than white. He's freaked out. He's drinking a beer. And I said, "What happened?" He says, "Well, I was looking at the fuses downstairs, and I kept feeling like somebody was looking at me. So I turned around, and there was this white man, his head floating behind him. Had long hair and a beard and a mustache, and it was just his head floating behind him. So he ran up the stairs, and he called me. And so he said that, and I said, "Okay, well, I'll take care of it." And he says, "What do you mean you'll take care of it?" I said, "Yeah, I'll take care of it." I said, "What do you mean I'll take care of it?" I said, "Well," he said, "Did you know it was done?" I said, "Yeah, but it wasn't bothering anybody." And so I happened to have this tooth of a sperm whale, it's ivory, that I've had carved, actually. And I put it on the steps, and I breathed some life into it. And I walked away laughing, because what I told it to do was, when the ghost came by, is to prick it in the foot, and the ghost was going to go hopping away. I woke up the next day, the ghost was gone, never came back. But I don't usually do anything to ghosts, because unless they're bugging me, I don't care. Now again, this has nothing to do with mushrooms, or does it? It was like the coming together of two different forces put me in that place. And the ability to see what's going to come of what I'm doing is like nobody would have cultured the bad mushrooms except me. They would culture the good ones.
What do you think you were expecting when you started culturing the mutant mushrooms?
A bigger, bluer mushroom.
Yeah.
I never ate mushrooms that often, so it didn't matter to me if they were strong or not.
Why do you think the mushroom turns blue?
Oxidation of the chemicals.
Yeah.
That's whenever you cut it, what are you doing? Adding oxygen, air.
Yeah.
When you squeeze it, you're some of the mushrooms would come out with like a fuzzy coat, like a squirrel,
Hmm.
where you could kind of squeeze it in, and that would it would have your fingerprints on it, but they'd be blue, which is dangerous because if you touch one, your fingerprints go with it. I mean, you could see the rings on your fingers and everything.
Really?
Yeah, they'd be like this, but they'd have like a core on the outside of like fuzzy hair, but it wasn't. It was just fluffy. And you put your fingers on it and you pull them back, and you got blue fingerprints that you could read. And I always have to be careful about that because when I take pictures, I could see the fingerprints on the mushrooms I was taking pictures of.
Wow, that's interesting. Huh.
So I would have to wear plastic gloves or something to stop that.
Right.
Otherwise, my fingerprints would have been over everything.
Do you have any remaining goals in the realm of mushrooms? Do you think there's any work left to be done, a species that you want to cultivate? I mean, there's a lot of fascinating species out there.
Well, I found in this place, I have found cyanescence. Not far from here, some friends found some azure essence near their house. I've seen liberty caps here, and there's another one that's got a little girl's name. I forget what it's called. And really, when we get away from here, there used to be stunty eyes.
Mm-hmm.
They look like a cyanescence, but more fragile. And out of all the mushrooms I've encountered, the only ones I really found interesting is the cyanescence and the azure essence and the PEs.
Yeah.
And I've never had any inclination to grow any of the other ones. And I've always known where they are. But me, I don't have any aspirations to do anything with them. In fact, to me, it's more like I'm closing a chapter on them. I used to do art. When I got done with the art, I burned it all. I used to write. A lot of the stuff that I wrote about, outer states of consciousness, it's all burnt. I don't recommend anybody bury me in the wrong place, but other than that, just to me, there's no future in mushrooms for me. Other than I go pick them all the time.
Bury you in the wrong places and you might be fed on by a mushroom?
No, I always joke. I was joking to my son, and I said, cremate me and throw me on the stairs of a temple in Cambodia, and the wind will blow me away. That's fine with me. I have no connection to here.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had a connection to here for most of my life. And the dying part, I was treated so badly that I actually wanted to die before I died. So I wanted to die and become back as somebody else. And guess what? I died and came back as somebody else. The me that's here isn't the me that died. That was a different me. And so a lot of what people want and need and think they want and need is not important to me. I mean, there's very little in life that's important to me. And that's why I can do the things that I do is I don't care if something fails or works. I usually know what's going to happen. In fact, life can get boring sometimes. I advertised for a roommate one time, and this woman called me and said, "Can it be a girl?" I said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And I saw her at a distance, and I thought, I'm going to have sex with this girl. And it wasn't my deal that I was going to have sex with her, it was her deal. But it happened. I didn't know who she was. I'd never seen her before. But I usually know. When I married my wife, I knew I was going to get divorced. When my son was born, I knew he was going to be born. I knew he was going to be a boy.
Mm-hmm.
I knew he was going to be like me. there haven't been very many surprises in my life.
Is your son interested in mushrooms?
No, he's straight as I used to be.
Yeah.
You know, when I was in high school, I was the town example of how to be, how to act, how to react, how to deal with people. Our whole family was the example in the whole town.
Mm-hmm.
We did no wrong. We did everything right. We didn't get in trouble. We stood up for the right things. But nothing has changed.
Yeah.
But, you know, time marches on. If I hadn't have been here, it would have been somebody else.
I don't know about that. It's a pretty extraordinary and unique discovery, the PE. You really think someone else would have found that?
There were a lot of minds out there thinking the same thing. Paula could have done it. Anybody could have done it.
Yeah.
They didn't, but... And I guess, you know, that's the whole thing about this is... it's like a shipwreck. You think you're in America, but you're actually on one of the islands, wrecked on one of the islands, and you're not quite there yet. And so, I don't know who started the story, but, you know, the bloody letter, I thought that was hilarious. Like, I could see Paula crawling to the mailbox and dying as he puts his bloody letter in his mailbox chute. And for Mushroom John to even come to say anything like, so ridiculous. So I guess it was good for me. It was a good comedy.
What do you think of Pollock's death?
I don't think much about it, actually. I heard about it real soon after it happened. I didn't know him that well. I knew very few things about him. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't expecting it either.
Yeah.
You know, life and death things are not a big deal to me. I mean, everybody lives and dies. Just the fact that he was in mushrooms. But when I read about the part where he was making a lot of money and handling a lot of money, I could see why it happened. But I've never really thought about it other than that. You know, too bad.
Yeah.
I am. When I was growing up, one of the things the girls used to say all the time about me was, "You have no feelings." Well, it's not that I don't have any feelings. It's I just look at things differently. You know, I've seen a lot of people die. I've seen a lot of people get beat up. I've seen a lot of stuff. And so living and dying is not an issue for me. It's like leaving a name behind is not an issue for me. You know, I used to wear a suit. I made a lot of money and give it all away. It wasn't an issue for me. The mushrooms, I don't know. They have a life of their own. To me, it's like the mushrooms came to me and they showed me something and then they went away. And I let them.
Do you have any spores left from the penis envy lineage? I know you said that it died out. Are there any left?
I've got 2 or 3 caps, and that's it. And I know somebody who has probably still got some of the spore prints, but they're 5 years old, 7 years old. I'm actually going to cook up some agar because I'm going to do some morels. And so if I do that in the near future, I might try them again, but the last time we tried them, it didn't work.
Try. Keep them alive.
Yeah, and then I have the mycelium of peas, and I don't know anybody who does that stuff anymore.
I do.
You want to grow some?
Yeah.
Well, the peas that we got aren't anything like the peas that are out there. They're not white. They're the right color and everything.
Sounds better to me.
There's I'm throwing out about 1,000 prints today.
No, don't throw them out. I'll take them. I can use them for microscopy at the very least.
Oh, I've been throwing them out. God, I've been throwing them out by the hundreds. There's all Huatla, and I mean, some of the ones we got at the end. I forget where we got them. Oh, a friend of mine moved out of town and was able to get them for us. But the old grew huge, and the prints were like that big. Well, I'll see what I've got, but I think most of those have gone already. I know there's about 1,000 in the box, though, but I don't know what they are.
I'm going to stop the record. Is there any final thing that you think should be said, or?
No, not really. I'm not a final thing kind of guy.
This podcast is brought to you by Matcha, matcha.com. This is Andrew Weil's Matcha Tea Company. Andrew Weil is one of the pioneers of the study of psychedelic drugs, and he now owns a matcha tea company that sells imported matcha that's tested for heavy metals. If you go to matcha.com, you can see the analysis of all of their teas. I drink it almost every day. It is delicious matcha. If you go to matcha.com and use the discount code Hamilton, you get 10% off any teas that you buy. Thank you, matcha.com.